First of all, I'd just like to say it's a real privilege for me to be here this evening. I'm very passionate about a number of things. Evidence and science is one of them. But much more importantly for tonight is the role of volunteers and the collaboration across different perspectives. So, what is brought together here in front of me is a group of people who give their time voluntarily and come from different walks of life. And I think it's so important in initiatives like this. And this is a classic example in the Chilterns area of bringing together farmers and volunteers who are passionate about nature conservation, because I think together we can achieve so much. So I'm just going to chat a little bit about my journey through the life of recording and wildlife, and hopefully tie that in with the inspiration that comes from what you guys are doing in the Chilterns. So just a bit about the journey, a bit about celebrating volunteering, and importantly, from a national perspective, both as a result of my work at BTO and my continuing work at Natural England, the impact that this volunteering activity and survey data can have. And I'd like to start off very briefly with a story from 2 decades ago, at the beginning of the 2000s. I was working at English Nature at the time, and there was a proposal by a port company in Southampton to develop a container terminal at Dibden Bay. And Dibden Bay on Southampton Water, it was an SSSI. The whole of Southampton Water and the Solent was a special protection area for birds and a special area of conservation under the Habitats Directive. The most important sort of protection levels that the legislation can offer nature. And as English Nature, we had to estimate with the developer what impact that was going to have. And it was clearly going to have a damaging impact on those sites and on those birds. We worked together for a while to try and see how to avoid that or mitigate it. That couldn't be done. We ended up in a public inquiry, which was a massive affair. This was a £650 million container terminal, and it was going to not only take away habitat that was used by birds directly, by invertebrates. It was going to destroy an area of land that was important for its flora as well as its fauna. It was going to affect the coastal geomorphology, the patterns of sedimentation in the estuary, which give rise to the mudflats that the birds and other animals use. There's clearly going to be a massive impact. And unfortunately, we couldn't resolve with the developer that they would accept the extent of the damage it would cause. And so it went to a public inquiry to be determined. And English Nature had 5 specialists giving evidence at that public inquiry, including ornithologists talking about the way in which birds use that site. Well, to cut a long story short, this public inquiry lasted 14 months. The environment part of it lasted 2 months. Natural England was in the English Nature was in the witness box for over a week. I myself was in there for a day and a half. Our evidence was very closely scrutinised. And then the public inquiry closed, the inspector goes away and writes up a report. That takes another year. So a couple of years down the line, the developer had by this time spent £100 million on trying to get their development in place and the container terminal built. A couple of years later, the Secretary of State for Transport, because it was a port development, phones me up at work one day. I was leading the English Nature team, and his officer said that the Secretary of State that morning would make an announcement that the Dibden Bay container terminal, which was examined in public inquiry, was refused on the grounds of environmental damage. And my point about all of this is that the main evidence about the environmental damage was collected by BTO volunteers undertaking the wetland bird survey. So that straight away, the idea that this work, this volunteering work, can have an impact at a national level has been a big learning experience for me, and that kind of formed the next 2 decades of my work. But my journey with birds and with surveying started long before that. And in 1970, I took part as a 16-year-old in the first bird atlas that the BTO undertook. I was living in southwest Scotland at the time, and my dot on the map for that particular atlas was a peregrine eyrie on the coast of southwest Scotland, which at the time were quite rare and special birds. I followed that with the second BTO atlas in 1988, and my dot on the map in that period was breeding Chetty's warblers in Gwent, the first breeding record of those. And in 2010, in the current, what is the current BTO atlas, where the data was collected between 2007 and 2011, my memorable record was a quail breeding in the square I was looking at in northwest Norfolk. And kind of for me, that's the power of the taking part in these big volunteer survey events where you can find your own dot on the map. And it's a really nice thing to be able to open a book and have a look and say, well, I did that bit there. And that's important feedback for the individual doing the kind of survey. But these surveys are vitally important in another way too. And what the Atlas process has shown with BTO is that that begins to identify things that are going on at quite a macro level with our birds. And of course, the first Atlas between 1968 and 1972 identified farmland bird losses. And that in itself was an important contribution. But what that did in identifying that issue was then enabled BTO to undertake 15 years of research paid for by the government to understand, to document the losses of farmland birds, first of all, to understand why those birds were declining, and then to be able to begin to help to implement solutions. And if I just give a little example of that, so there are a number of bird species, farmland bird species, that were declining, reed bunting and yellowhammer in particular, and it was identified that these birds were short of food in the winter period, something that became known as the hungry gap. And of course, when farmers began to be able to introduce measures under agri-environment schemes, then that issue could be addressed. So providing stubbles, leaving stubbles in the autumn with seeds on them, and also bird food strips on the sides of fields, and providing seed for birds during the hungry gap meant that these issues could be addressed. So it's quite a nice story to understand that from the initial findings by volunteer data gathered for an atlas, that farmland birds are in rapid decline, to then to be able to begin to fuel research. The government then realised the problem. They pay for research with the specialist organisation BTO to understand what's going on, and then they continue to fund BTO to help design and measure the impact of the measures, the agri-environment measures that hopefully will address the losses. So more recently in my time, I'm in my 12th year of 2 breeding bird survey squares, one in Cambridgeshire and one in northwest Norfolk. And it's really interesting to think about the breeding bird survey. For the observer, for the individual, I think one gets a sense of a patch, a place you go to every year for 2 visits, And it might be an area of the countryside you wouldn't otherwise go to. And so you find out about new places, and you can year on year build your species list up. You become motivated to want to see different things on your breeding bird survey transect every year, and also to notice changes for yourself as an individual. But of course, for the BTO, the work that we all do as volunteers for the Breeding Bird Survey gives the BTO this world-class, and I really mean it as world-class, population trend data for a whole range, 140 species or so, where the information gathered by volunteers like yourselves and like me are absolutely vital for this really gold standard information on population trends. I'm a very active bird watcher. I go birding as much as I possibly can, and now I've retired from the day job, I get a bit more opportunity to do that. But every time I go bird watching, as well as my binoculars and my telescope, my phone is always with me as another piece of vital equipment that I take bird watching with me, and that's because of the Bird Track app, which sits on that phone, and it enables me to record every bird that I see or hear on my bird watching trips. And the BTO, who run the Bird Track app with our partners, are able to use that data. Now, it's not rigorous collected data like the Breeding Bird Survey, but nevertheless, it's vitally important data when you think about the scale of data that's coming in. So I just looked at the Bird Track app online before we started this evening to discover that this year, by the end of November, Bird Track had already received over 7 million records from volunteers right across the UK. And so this is a database of some incredible scale. When I look at my own contribution over the years, and I've been, as well as running it regularly since 2011, I've also been back into my notebooks that I kept as a young bird watcher. And I've added data in from my notebooks into the Bird Track app. I discovered that overall, the world over, because Bird Track works wherever you are in the world, I've put in 124,000 records, 4,400 complete lists of birds, covering 2,500 species that I've seen around the world. And most of those, to be honest, most of those records are from my bird watching in the UK. 106,000 records from 3,800 complete lists. And that data is really, really good for me. It's kind of like a digital notebook. It enables me to go back and look at where I saw birds, when I saw them. I can relive moments in my birding past that, you know, are really delightful to be able to kind of go and remember. And so for me, it's a very important resource. I can look at graphs in there. I can pull graphs off and look at the seasonality of my records. And for example, I wrote a piece in Red 67, one of the BTO books in the last year, that brought together new writing and new art about the 67 red list species. And I chose to write about a wading bird called a ruff. And while I was writing that piece, I went and looked at my Bird Track records, and I was able to use a graph that looked at the number of birds seen in every week of the year. And I discovered, of course, that I've seen ruff every week of the year, whereas the peaks of when I see ruff are in the spring and the autumn, because predominantly these birds are a passage migrant. We do have a few through the winter, and we do have a very few breeding ruff in the UK. But my own observation of ruff across that period means that you know, the seasonality of those records is very evident, and it mimics the seasonality that everybody has in seeing ruff across the year. And those sort of ways in which I can go and look at the data and print things off and make graphs and study, you know, past experiences are very, very important to me. And that's a motivation for us to keep on doing the surveys that we do. Of course, bird track is also very important for science, and we're at BTO, the scientists are currently analysing how the bird track records can be a proxy for more rigorous surveys that are more difficult for people to kind of get involved in. And I think bird track will be a very important part of the next atlas later on in the 2020s, when we can use the data from bird track more readily. Of course, increasingly, the county bird recorders use bird track data to inform the county bird reports at the end of the year. And I think this is very important because it standardizes this thing about how we reflect the changes to common birds. It's very easy to understand what's going on with rarer birds, and there's lots of effort put into conserving rarer birds. But to understand what's really going on with common birds is very important. And so previously, a bird recorder in a county, when it came to things like blackbird or house sparrow or chaffinch, they might simply kind of have a look at the records that people are submitting, and many people won't submit those records of commoner birds, and they may make some statement which is informed by their own observation, their own knowledge. Whereas nowadays, they can turn to bird track, and those all-important species narratives that accompany the numbers in county bird reports can all be standardised because the county recorders have gone and looked at the data in bird track. And I think that's really, really important aspect of that surveying mechanism. And then the last thing that bird track does, of course, is year on year, you can look at the main front page of the website, and you can dial up any species you want and have a look at the reporting rate for that species ever against the reporting rate of that species for the current year. And what that gives you is an early warning of things that might be a little different and indeed a little worrying. Bird track is one of the databases that has a global contribution too. So the other thing to go and look at if you're interested in this on the web is Euro Bird Portal, where bird track and all the other databases from across European countries are put together in order to create lovely visual pictures of the movement of birds through migration. And you can interrogate Euro Bird Portal, you go and have a look and watch the maps colour up as migrant birds come into the Northern Hemisphere in the spring and colour down as they disappear back into the tropical regions for their winter quarters. It's a very powerful visualization of bird migration that's made possible through the data that we as volunteers collect in our bird watching activity. The one last thing about bird track that was important to me is in my world travels, I visited China in 2015 and saw a species called rufous-headed robin, which at the time was very rare. And indeed, my documented evidence of that species on bird track is the last documented sighting of the species by a Western ornithologist anywhere in the world. And so that will become in itself a very important record in due course. And we of course hope that this very secretive and difficult bird to see is still in existence elsewhere in China, and we wait avidly for somebody else to see it too. So I just want to finish by talking. I started with a story from 2 decades ago, and I just want to finish with a short piece about 2 recent BTO reports. And when I say recent, they're both within the last month. So the first was the climate change report, which was prepared ready for COP26, and you can find these reports on the BTO's website on the front page. And that report showed that our seabirds and our upland birds are the 2 communities of bird species that are most under threat as a result of climate change. And of course, importantly, it identifies that the solutions to identifying nature-based solutions to address both the climate and biodiversity crisis need to take place in a way that don't further damage those communities of birds, and particularly in the uplands, planting trees needs to be in the right place, particularly for species like curlew, so we don't further impact their ability to breed. And of course, it's the upland breeding bird survey work that has provided the data that informs that really, really important report. The second one is the Birds of Conservation Concern, which came out this year, identified 3 more species that are now on the red list. Unfortunately, those are swift, house martin and greenfinch. And of course, house martin, the data that is used for that is part of the house martin survey undertaken by volunteers, but also the breeding bird survey data where house martin is recorded there. With greenfinch, it's garden birdwatch, and of course there's a whole cadre of volunteers that maybe can't get out and about in the countryside, but still can contribute their wonderful volunteer records through the BTO's garden birdwatch, which identified the decline in greenfinch. So I think that's where I want to end. It's just such a pleasure to be able to talk to you about the power of volunteer data and what it can do, and how that's gone on for decades really, and BTO is still very much engaged with the new nature recovery agenda. I'm very much engaged with it through my Natural England board work, but it can only take place really through the power of people like yourselves, volunteers who gather the empirical data, who give up your time and your effort, learn new things, do new things, work together in a community like this Chilterns community. And I think it's a very powerful and wonderful thing. And it's been a privilege to talk to you this evening about that. Thank you very much indeed.
Andy, thank you very much. Tricky on Zoom to kind of really respond to that, but I'm sure there are lots of rounds of applause in people's lounges as we sit and finish. Thank you for that. Amazing, the breadth and depth, and I think your summary there just kind of really hit a lot of things that have started to come out from the evaluation around the evidence base. From every blue tit, you're able to make such a use of that kind of data. And you mentioned Yellowhammers and the Hungry Gap, and that's kind of played out with our work in the Chilterns. We'll talk a little bit about that after the break with their work with supplementary feeding and feed accounts, and Pete's going to talk a little bit about his work on that area. You talked about it's your own patch. And my own personally, definitely, I've probably not quite such big stats as yours, Andy, but I've got similar stats, and it's great to kind of look back and oh, well, there's my reed bunting territory, or there's my whatever territory. You begin to really appreciate and look hard, and you look because you have to look. That makes sense. That really kind of played out, but just the scale. Okay, we may have thought, well, I only had 25 species on my breeding bird survey, or I had 10 species of butterfly on my survey, or 5 whatever species. But actually, when you aggregate it, the value of 7 million records, and that's just for this year, not even retrospective data, is just huge. Quite how you analyse that, and the guys who know their stats analyse that, but it's absolutely massive. So next time we come back and we thought I only had 15 species on my survey, actually that's 7 million 15. Makes a massive difference. So Andy, thank you for that. Really, hopefully, puts all the work we're doing in the project into context. And hopefully when you're trudging around on your 6 o'clock in the morning or whatever it is in the spring, it really does make a difference nationally and to us in the Chilterns. So thank you for that. Not many questions in the chat, Andy, there, but there's one that's coming, if you're okay to take a question before I summarise what's happened in the Chilterns this year. It's come from Kate, and asking around, are there examples of how the volunteer recording that you described, how is it written up anywhere? Is there any way you can go to and say, this is the difference that volunteer surveys make?
Yeah, so a great question, Kate. Thanks very much. Very good to see you here this evening too. So each of the surveys, a breeding bird survey, wetland bird survey, garden bird watch, a bird track, all of them have a newsletter, it comes out online now, which records a lot of the effort. But the breeding bird survey and the wetland bird survey in particular have annual reports, which kind of set out all of the things that have gone on in the year, put all the numbers together. In fact, the wetland bird survey, you can go and look at the wetland bird survey online, and there's a wetland bird survey report online, which is interactive. You can dial up any of the sites across the country. You can see how the numbers are changing over time. But the summary information about what the surveys are finding out are really in the annual reports. And go to BTO News, the magazine of the BTO, and it will give you a kind of sense of where to go next for those reports. But they're all available online, whether you're a member of the BTO or not, and they're very good resource for understanding. And then, as I mentioned, Birds of Conservation Concern is a report that comes out every few years. That's another source. And then every couple of years is State of the UK's Birds, which is a joint product between the RSPB, the BTO, and a range of other people, which kind of is a report aimed at government that tells them, what's going on and what we need to do about it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy, and great comment. Also, Nick Bowles from Butterfly Conservation in the chat, and we'll play out from the other taxa groups that we could equally be talking about butterflies here. We could equally be talking about plants. There are recording schemes, and the volume of data equally joins even more powerfully when you join bird data with butterfly data, with plant data, with other taxa as well, to really kind of get that rounded view of what's happening across our wildlife as well. So
yeah, I should have said that.
Thanks, Nick, for that. Yeah,
I should have said that, Nick. The BTO's BBS Breeding Bird Survey also does butterfly recording alongside it and mammal recording. And then increasingly Bird Track has the ability for you to record your mammal sightings, dragonfly sightings, butterfly sightings. And as Nick said, as both Nicks have said, this is really important to integrate these different taxa in these surveys. Really good point. Thank you.
So on that point, it's almost the seamless radio to Ken Bruce link. If it's okay, Andy, I'll maybe share, because that's exactly kind of really almost the genesis of the Tracking the Impact project, really. So if it's okay, Andy, I'll pick up and share my screen and walk you through what's come out from Tracking the Impact in this essentially first season. So let me just quickly share my screen as well. Can I do that at the same time? Yes, I can. Okay, so tracking, I just want to spend maybe 10-15 minutes just playing back an overview really of what's come out from this summer's survey season. So Tracking the Impact project has a number of strands to it that I'll talk through, but the main focus really is on local structured recording. So where did it come from? Just as a recap, and my slides aren't changing now. Has anybody seen my slides change? Probably not. I'll come to it anyway. So where the genesis of this really 3 or 4 years ago in the development of the project and the funding bid to lottery really came around from all of the for all the national picture and as you say, Andy, across the world, the UK has incredible data what's happening on a national scale. What we were struggling to find in the Chilterns is how we get that similar level of data and how we get that similar level of understanding of what's happening in our kind of slightly smaller regional level. We couldn't press a button and say, this is what's happening to butterflies in the Chilterns, because a lot of the surveys were set up to be representative on a national level, not on a local level. So we said, well, how do we, so in trying to bring about all the kind of change and you were talking about then around decisions and how we make the best for wildlife, how do we begin to get that data to back up our own local decisions that complement the national ones? So essentially, Tracking Movement was born about trying to plug that gap. I'm just trying to get my slides to move and they're not wanting to move. So you'll bear with me as we go through. They'll catch up in a sec. So essentially, we started with that kind of challenge. That how do we, over a longer period, build this kind of survey program that means we press a button, we can find out what's happening to our birds, to our plants, to our butterflies in our patch in the Chilterns. So we gathered the great and the good together. So we had representatives from BTO, from Plant Life, from Butterfly Conservation, representatives from local wildlife trust, from our local record centre came together, from CEH and others who have been brilliant in terms of this whole project and sharing their expertise and time and really working it up between us, which has been fantastic. Thank you for your time there. And so, well, how do we address this? How do we actually go about plugging this overall gap? And essentially, long story short, I'll try to share my screen as we speak again. But long story short, they basically said, well, actually, let's take the national schemes. So Breeding Bird Survey, the Wider Countryside Butterfly Survey, and the National Plant Monitoring Scheme, and let's I'll do it this way around. There we go. So we're up to there, and let's try and replicate that locally. So we keep the rigor of the national schemes. We keep the rigor of the scientific validation, the basis of it. We keep all the training and everything else that comes with working, and we'll apply that locally in our patch. So the map you can see here, we generated 51k, or randomly generated 51 kilometre squares that we thought were representative of the patch. And the aim was, in the time then, was to get those covered by the Breeding Bird Survey and the Wider Countryside Butterfly Survey and the National Plant Monitoring Scheme in each square over time. Is the long-term, quite ambitious aim, but we're working towards that. That we then start to build that kind of cross-taxa the piece as we go through. So using the three surveys. Have I frozen for everybody? Andy, can you give us a way? Can you still hear me, Andy? Yeah, you can. It's just my screen, and that's cool. So that was the gist of where we're at. We set that out with that in mind, and obviously then COVID hit last year. So last summer, last spring was obviously a very frustrating year for a lot of us involved. We couldn't get out, we couldn't survey much as we did towards the back end of the summer. So this year really has been the first real kind of opportunity to deliver the program and to really get the scale out there. And I just wanted to share with you now a number of the results from that, but I'm struggling to, there we go. I'm trying to move through my slides. That's the one. So key headlines from this year, playing back, and thank you to all those that took part in the formal surveys this year. It's been a massive effort to kind of drag ourselves out of COVID and to get ourselves out and about. So of the 150 opportunities to survey, so the 50 of each of the three taxa, we got just shy of 60% coverage, which in the first year of a project of this scale and this nature, I think it's a pretty good effort. So thank you again to everybody for all your help in getting out there and getting your surveys completed. Some headlines from there, over 180 surveys. So essentially for every day between April and September, at least one of you was out completing a survey on the ground in the Chilterns, which is pretty amazing to think as we were working through our summers. And adding it all together, if you add in other records, we're somewhere just shy of 350 species across the different surveys that were recorded, and starting to build, as Andy said, this 7 million, well, our contribution, if you like, to the 7 million, starting to build in this summer is kind of just shy of 2,500 records this year. So a brilliant start from what's been a pretty tricky time to introduce a program like this with COVID. So thank you again for your efforts. Stats on how many kilometers you've walked, how many hours that are out there. When you start adding it up, it just starts, it's huge, the contribution that you've all made in getting out there and getting things started. So thank you again as we work through. And the program's not only just around the surveying, but it's also about trying to help inexperienced surveyors who want to get started, or people who are not so confident on the species ID to come in as well, and more on some of the species ID training as we go through. So some real headline stats. What does that really look like from an individual perspective, from an individual survey perspective? Oops, there we go. So I've done some maps now of each of the three surveys. So we've got here a coverage map. So we've got the 50 squares there. The ones in green are the squares that were covered this year, and the ones in blue are the ones that are still vacant. So if anybody's out there thinking, oh, I fancy a breeding bird survey square or a butterfly square or a plant square for next year, then there's plenty going. So feel free to put your hand up or drop me an email. We'll talk about that there, but there's plenty going. And now we combined here with the existing breeding bird survey squares. So Phil Tizard on the call, our regional coordinator for BTO, thanks for all your support in helping us to amalgamate the existing breeding bird survey squares with the new ones and adding it all together between us. So 38 squares have been covered with their 2 visits, 73 species on those surveys, and 1,500 or so records coming out. And we're averaging at the moment plus or minus 26 species a square. So I don't know, Andy, how that compares with on a national level, but that's probably consistent from given the habitat we've got in the Chilterns. We haven't got a lot of water. That's probably pretty consistent. So thank you for all of your time and effort in bringing all that together. And I think, as Andy said, one thing that really hit in his presentation around actually this isn't about the rarities. Yes, it's very nice that I think, Susie, you found a ring ouzel on one of your surveys, and we're finding the odd kind of passage migrant still coming through. This really is about the common species. It's about finding out what's happening to our yellowhammers, to our linnets, to our great tits, to our great spotted woodpeckers in the Chilterns. They're our birds, and we're trying to track that trend. So the rarity value of this, as much as it's very nice, it's not so much about the rarities, it's about the more the common. So that's the kind of their headlines, if you like, from the breeding bird survey. From a butterfly perspective, if my screen lets me go through to the next stage. Oh, no, I've gone a bit too far. Anyway, so just some headlines on there as well. So and just picking that kind of point out really. So skylarks, in a largely farm landscape, you'd hope that skylarks were doing still well, and they've been recorded on all but 4 of the squares so far. Yellowhammer still holding up, just over half of our squares. Corn buntings maybe not so. We probably knew that, and we had that kind of hunch, but the surveys are playing that out, that our corn buntings are struggling, and linnet as well. So even just from this first year, when we don't really have a comparable data set, this picture's starting to kind of emerge as we go through. And as we build the data, we could be more clever with our analysis and more clever with our trends and our comparisons. From a butterfly perspective, so again, green are the squares that were covered, and blue are the squares that are still vacant. So likewise, if you fancy picking up a butterfly square next year, then there are plenty still to pick up. And correct me, Nick, if you'll shout me down, I'm sure if I've got this horribly wrong, but with 30 species is probably getting somewhere near half of the common butterfly species that we'd record in the UK. So in the first year across 27 squares, that's pretty much, we're getting half and coming up in the 7, which is great to play back. Just shy of 500 records and averaging somewhere around 11 species per square, which, given the conditions this spring, I think some of our conversations earlier, Nick, butterfly conservation, Nick, we're getting to the end of May and we hadn't thought any butterflies were going to come out at all. It was so wet and cold and such a late spring. So all kinds of other climatic conditions coming out. So brilliant coverage from those who've been involved in the butterfly surveys. Some headlines there coming out from the survey, in that meadow brown, probably as you'd expect, was our most numerous recorded butterfly species, just shy of 1,000 individuals and recorded on over 13 weeks of the summer. The small white, maybe not so much in numbers, but it was probably the most frequently recorded, as in the most number of weeks where it was recorded. And some of our rarer species, our more kind of chalkgrasser and specialists. Bearing in mind, this is a wider countryside survey being picked up on some of the wider countryside squares, as opposed to their more known about kind of nature reserves and pure sites. So we're starting to pick up hopefully some different distribution as well. But as we say, it's the first year. Time will tell when the database really builds. And then from a plants perspective, plant monitoring scheme, so less coverage, but brilliant from a standing start to get 17 squares covered. And thank you again for everyone who's covered a plant monitoring square. 49 families of plants being covered. It's the way that the National Plant Monitoring Scheme works. Again, just shy of 250 species and 1,200 or so records. So again, slightly different one to set up, and a lot of feedback around how we set the National Plant Monitoring Scheme up. But brilliant, we're starting to get out there and record some of the key habitat, the basis of everything that really comes in, and that's what the Plant Monitoring Scheme gives us. Just picking out 1 or 2 areas there of some of our more grasser and specialist species. So again, these aren't squares on nature reserves, they're actually randomly generated 1K squares. But cowslip starting to pick up in over half of the surveys. Horseshoe vetch, a really key butterfly food source, out there being picked up on probably about 1/3 of the squares, and you can see the kind of figures coming through. Last year, brilliant year it seemed to be for orchids. can move for orchids as we came through. And again, that's reflected in the number of squares that we're picking up, particularly pyramidal and other orchid species as well. So brilliant coverage and a brilliant start to the programme. It'd be great looking forward 5 years. When we've got 5 years of data, we can start to build some more stories about maybe what's happening. So great start, and thank you all again. I mentioned that the programme also is bringing in a lot of training programmes. So we've delivered a lot of species identification courses, 24 sessions, some in birds. So the birding pictures there, you'll see what 5 o'clock in the morning in thick mist on Ivanhoe Beacon, or in brace rain, kind of whether the plant guys get the lucky ones. They're out during the day when it's nice and hot and sunny. So lots of ID courses, lots of survey methodology courses to help to train up to get involved in the various surveys themselves. We've done that kind of blend of online workshops as well. So some ID courses online as well as in the field. And depending on which side of the fence you fit, it's either the bane of your life or one of the best things for the summer, but a really active WhatsApp group. Posting lots of pictures. What's this? Can you help me with this? Sharing sightings, ID tips, all sorts. So it's great to see that whole kind of energy and helping us to kind of learn more and to share more, and also to develop our own skills. So if you've been involved in any of that, then the trainers, particularly Dave and Nick and others, and the guys from Bebout, and have been running that, that's been brilliant. So thank you for your support. As with everything in our first year, there's lots more we can do. And thanks, Kate, on the call for your time in helping us with the evaluation. Lots of things we can learn to improve for next year, making your life easier, helping to make you feel more part of the programme. And so I won't go through the details of what we do, but suffice to say there's a lot of information, and we'll be making lots of hopefully improvements to next year to make it better and easier for you. But just really wanted to share a few quotes that came out from the surveys that really, I guess, kind of play back, Andy, to what you said in your presentation. Really, some of the highlights that you've played back that actually, and I won't read them all out necessarily, but quotes there about the data with all the volunteers really forms this bigger picture, that real sense of actually when you add it together, it really tells a story. And actually feeling, I guess, more connected to the Chilterns. Great to be part of. Actually, there's a lot happening in the Chilterns, a lot of energy at the moment in the Chilterns, a lot of conservation work, and you're all part of making that happen. On a more personal level, opening your eyes, yes, it makes you surveying, makes you look, it makes you see, it makes you find things that you wouldn't ordinarily see when you're just out on your dog walk. Getting time with other experienced people, particularly the training leaders and guys, again, thanks for your time. Getting their experience, getting their particular things, knowing that actually doing some surveys and being able to then share that enthusiasm with a farmer or landowner and helping them to get as excited about what they're doing is key. Some things you probably wouldn't have done before that stood up on Ivanhoe Beacon at 6 a.m. in thick fog. Well, it's not your average kind of Saturday morning, but actually quite good fun when you're out there and working it through and getting to find new areas. When would you ever go for a walk on that particular area through that farm on that path over that way? Well, actually now the surveys are and you're finding all kinds of little hidden gems, new populations of Chiltern gentians that we didn't know about before, those kinds of things. So really kind of playing out, and that's great to see that that's playing out in your feedback, and it's great to hear, and hopefully we can harness that and make more of that in the coming years. So enough from me really, and I hope that's given you a real broad overview as to what's come out. As I say, we'll be able to do more analysis and more reports in time as the data builds, but really just to say thank you for your time. If you've been involved in running a training course, whether it's a survey course or an ID course, you've been helped in setting the project up or overseeing and help steer the project, it makes a massive difference. So it really is starting to get some energy. So brilliant to be able to report back a full year and a first start to the project. So thank you all. Enough for me, and I will stop sharing my clumsy slides that don't want to move and hand back to you, Andy, for our first of our panel Q&As.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. Great presentation, thanks. Really enjoyed seeing all of that and the numbers behind what an amazing group of wonderful volunteers you all are. So now it gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce three of the volunteers to talk about their own experiences in the plant monitoring scheme, in breeding bird survey, in wider countryside butterfly survey, and some people who are new to surveying completely. So I'd like to introduce Marika, Susie and Tim. And if you get your cameras on and then everybody can see you, that would be really great. So I'd like first to ask each of you just for a sentence or two about what you've been involved in, why you wanted to get involved, and some of your highlights. So Marika first.
Okay, so I got involved with the breeding birds and the plants scheme, and then through getting more involved with it all, we also I did this together with my husband, and we also got involved in the amphibians and reptiles. So we're involved in 3 types of surveys. And I mean, the reason I got involved was because I was on a sabbatical and I wanted to do something locally that contributed, that was interesting, and particularly do with biodiversity. So this seemed like a really good project to get involved in. And I've really enjoyed it. It's been fantastic. The training courses were great. And it's interesting going into a wood now, and it's like there's a whole extra dimension. I mean, I always heard the birds. There's this whole soundscape, because I can now recognize all these birds that by sound, which before I could only do by sight. And also, what was very exciting is going to some of the little chalk reserves. I mean, it was quite funny to see one next to the football ground in High Wycombe, which a tiny little place, but so incredibly full of local wildflowers, and to realize that we've got this incredible, habitat with such diversity on our doorstep. So yeah, that was very exciting for me, and also meeting all these lovely people.
That's very good. That's very good, Marika. Thanks ever so much indeed. Those stories are inspiring, and I love the fact that you're discovering these wonderful sites right next to, built up areas or High Wycombe football ground or wherever it is. It's very important. Tim, how about you?
Hi, Andy. Yes, I'd started in the BTO BBS about 3 or 4 years ago, mainly because I joined the BTO when the Atlas that you referred to came out, and I was fairly passive, but then I started realizing some of the science that came out of BBS and other surveys just blew my socks off. So I thought, well, I want to contribute to this. But I live in Aylesbury Vale, so I'm used to sort of flat clay country. And so when the Chilterns project came along, I thought, well, I really need to know more about the Chilterns. One of the things that surveying has really made me focus on, actually, is the habitat and really understanding the relation between the wildlife. As I say, I started with birds, but then I'm doing butterflies, how that wildlife relates to the habitat. So I thought, well, Chilterns is a fantastic area. I really ought to understand it more. And it's a great project. So that's why I've volunteered to pick up a couple of squares for birds and butterflies in the Chilterns. And for me, I think, yes, it's been not just that side has been a wonderful revelation, but also Marika mentioned the training. That really has been very good. My butterfly ID, for example, was not great, but I just found Nick Bowles' training was brilliant. And so I've really got to grips with that. The WhatsApp group is a fantastic thing, seeing what's going on there. And then just understanding my 2 squares and what's happening there, and getting to grips with them. Same with my squares outside the Chilterns. Everyone is different. It's always interesting to understand what is happening. What does the square look like? How does that compare, and how does that reflect in the butterflies and birds that I'm seeing? So yeah, it's fantastic.
Wonderful story, Nick. Tim, thank you very much indeed for that. And, it's very nice for me to hear that something like the Bird Atlas prompted you to sort of join the BTO and get involved. And then when you're involved like that, then there's something local like this wonderful Chilterns initiative to engage you even more in your local area. It's a fantastic story. Susie, I think you were new to surveying in every respect, and I'd love to hear your experiences and what it's felt like to you.
Yes, well, I love living in the Chilterns, and I heard about this project, and it was a lovely chance to get involved, to find out what we've got here, and then to be able to support changes that maybe landowners, land managers could make, and also making finding the base value so that you can spread the word, and any country user or the dog walkers or the whatever, they can know what we've got and value it. So this came along, and I somewhat innocently put my name down. Oh yeah, I'll do the butterfly. Oh yeah, I'll do the bird. Oh, I'll do the plant. I think going and standing in that wood, that I did about 8 recce visits for the birds. And after the first visit, I then, because we'd been lucky enough to have all those Zoom sessions last year, it was just continual. I didn't watch the news. It was just using those Zoom sessions. And to go out sort of 3 weeks later and stand in that wood, and I could hear the different 10 birds going off, and it's just brilliant. So yes, being able to contribute in that way has been fantastic. Didn't get a lot else done last year, but yeah.
That's really great. And of course, you know, what is very impressive about this project is that you've been able to continue it so well through the pandemic. And I think perhaps, you know, our experiences of nature are even more important to us during this time. You know, it's an opportunity to look after our own well-being, being out there, and as somebody else has said in the chat, I think, and Nick has already mentioned, you know, there's a real sense of achievement, and hearing from you three, you know, that comes across in spades, and it's a lovely thing to hear about. What else would any of the three of you like to say about this?
Just to re-emphasize about the training, they've been, the Zoom ones were brilliant, and the actual in-person ones were an absolute privilege. I feel absolutely spoiled that we've been so blessed by all the training that we've had. Thank you all. And meeting everybody as well. And I went up to Otmore with Marie the other week, and that was just brilliant, just hearing the starlings fly over. Thank you, Marie.
Yeah, that's really great. I think one of the wonderful aspects of this whole enterprise is that everybody's welcome, and that there's an opportunity for all of us to learn. I mean, I'm always learning. Okay, I can identify birds, but I try and do moths myself. I'm getting some help with plants again now, and that kind of thing. And I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to access leaders and trainers that can help us along that way, and that's very clearly an important part of this particular grouping. So we've heard from 3 people here who are, you know, of an age, shall I say, and that's really great, and the inclusive nature of this project is wonderful. But what I'd like to do now is introduce Steph, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the Chilterns New Shoots project, where people at the earlier stages of their lives can also get involved. And of course, from me, coming from the BTO with the BTO Youth Advisory Panel, this is something that I'm very, very passionate about too. So Steph, over to you to talk to us, first of all, about the Chilterns New Shoots project, and then we'll hear from 2 of the young people themselves. Thanks.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks very much. So, hi everyone, I'm Steph, and I'm a ranger with Chiltern Rangers, but also the community ranger for the Chalk Cherries Chairs project. So I work very closely with Nick, which made me very well placed to lead this fab project. So Chilterns New Shoots, there they are, all 16 of them, and a nice picture of the Chilterns as well. That's Andrew Stubbing's farm, Manor Farm in the Bradnam Valley. So there are 16 new shoots a bunch of 15 to 20-year-old young people. And a little bit of background first, and I think I'm going to have exactly the same problem as you, Nick, that the slides aren't going to move along, which is very frustrating. So where did the background really, so the Chilterns Champion Conference back in October 2020 focused very much on citizen science, chaired or a keynote speech by Chris Packham, and a bit like this evening, a real celebration of our and your impact of a species survey. And part of that conference at the end was a section on inspiring the next generation, and how we engage or don't young people, and who's coming through the ranks as the next naturalists, the next conservationists, the next citizen scientists. And through that panel discussion, which John Shaw chaired, my boss, Charlie, Mayer, Finley, Magnus, Ruben, Arjun, they spoke about their experiences and how they first, how their interest was sparked, I suppose. Lots of references to Spring Watch, family walks and sort of observing nature out on family walks. Lots of dinosaur references, as in a real interest in dinosaurs, and that their interest sort of carried on from there, really. Back gardens, but really we were also thinking about what really got them hooked in the first place. For some, it was work parties, RSPB work parties, or volunteering because of and through the Duke of Edinburgh Award scheme. But really the common theme that the young people spoke about, there they are, thanks Nick, the common theme was opportunity. Having the opportunity to get involved in conservation and nature and wildlife was what they spoke about. So we, from that discussion, Nick and I got together and a few other partners to discuss what we could do.
Just quickly, Steph, so I can drive from mine. So if you want to let me know when to move on, I can move on. Okay,
thank you. We'll stick with this slide for now then.
Yep.
That means that they didn't get to see your picture though, Nick. So maybe back.
Well, I did it. That's why I did it.
That's why you did it. I thought so. Back onto new shoot. So we wanted it to be designed by young people for young people. So we had the help of Luke Mariner and Megan McCavity, who are both BTO youth reps. So they're a bit further along the system, I suppose, experience that they're involved. They've got the passion. I'm not sure why Luke's so passionate about birds, Nick, but he's doing it. He's out there. He's ringing. He's learning from experts all the time. So we really wanted to speak to young people about what we could offer. And New Shoots is very much the first steps into conservation. So we speak about Luke and the young people on that panel, and they're further along the journey. This is like the first steps. So it was designed for young people who already have an interest in wildlife and nature, but perhaps don't know where to go from that. Like, I like it, but I don't know what to do. Give them a chance to meet other people, young people, but also professionals. And that was really a key, that we would give them the opportunity to meet each other, but also to work alongside people in our industry who are already have a career perhaps in conservation, or other volunteers. Next slide, please. It's going to be a slidey down. Okay. As it's Christmas next week, I thought I'd put this in a format of Christmas. Had my slides work, it would twinkle and everything, but that's technology for you. So speaking to Luke and Megan, we said, what if you had a wish list, what sort of thing could we offer? And they were quite clear about a few things. The first being that there should be no tests or exams, and it should be relaxed. And as an ex-teacher, I thought, well, how are we going to measure how you've learned? But we listened. Okay, so there's no tests or exams at the moment. The other thing that they spoke about was how sometimes the equipment and the expense of that equipment can actually be a barrier to involvement. So thanks to the lottery funding, obviously, we've been able to supply binoculars and ID guides where possible, where necessary, I suppose, so that we take that barrier away, to make it a bit more accessible. They wanted opportunities to visit some really nice places, so we thought, well, we'll make sure that we go to some of the best sites in the Chilterns that the Central Chilterns has to offer. Next slide is a catchphrase of 2020. So, as we said, aimed at 15 to 20-year-olds. Luke and Megan didn't really say this, but there really is a drop-off in engagement in this age group. Possibly pressures from school and just being a teenager, that there's not actually that much on offer for them. I think, forest schools are really popular in this country now. There's lots of emphasis on the primary age group, but once you get to secondary, there's less and less. So we wanted to appeal to this age group in particular. We decided that a good model would be 10 roughly monthly sessions to take them through a year in the British countryside, between June and finishing sort of March, because of the pressures of school. So we don't want to be, adding to that pressure when June is exam season. The idea is that the programme will allow them to develop their ID skills, have a go at wildlife surveying, get stuck in eventually with some practical conservation. So it was a real two-side programme, I suppose. Of spring and summer takes them through wildlife surveying and having a go at that, and then autumn winter, the actual get boots on the ground, get your hands dirty, delivering practical conservation. But still, we think like one of the best things about this is the fact that we will put the people in the way of more experienced people to share their knowledge, and Luke and Megan were clear that's how they've learned from older people who've been doing it for longer, who have that knowledge base already. So that was key as well. So on to the next one, please. So the partners. So back to the drawing board, we thought that to make this as powerful as possible, we should involve everybody locally, our conservation partners. So we've mentioned, now it's funded by the lottery. It's part of the Chalk Cherries Chairs Landscape Partnership and led by me. But very powerfully, we've worked with Be About Chiltern Society and National Trust. So the programme offers a chance to visit a National Trust site, a Chiltern Society site, and a Be About site, which has been fab. But also what it's done is opened up to the next slide, please, and you'll see more of this from photos anyway, that other local partners and really important charities doing the work are also involved. So at Eusden Bank, Brenda, I know you're watching, Brenda, or you were earlier, joined us for the butterfly transect. So it's brought in the Upper Thames branch of Butterfly Conservation. Fiona Everingham from BMERC joined us for the wildflower session. The BTO volunteers took us for a bird ringing session, and also the support of other people like Opticon. So we spoke about the barrier to equipment, that Opticon did a really good deal on those binoculars and hand lenses. So it's making it more accessible for the young people. And as we said, so it has come about that we have been able to as well invite those partners in to have the important discussions. So what have we been up to? We can show you some photos now. We kicked off at sort of Small Dean, Bradnamwood, Parkwood area for a birding session. Start with the birds. This was back in June, but it was really great. So Nick Sharon, the trust ranger for the area, gave a talk at the beginning about his role and how he got his role and got into conservation and his career. And then we went for a bit of bird ID, but also a breeding bird survey. So we were joined that day by Mike Wallen, county recorder. So again, another expert to share his knowledge. Phenomenal, just the ID from 100 meters away and more. And a nice picture of them looking through the binoculars supplied by Opticon. Next slide, please. Slide down. Some more pictures of them. So as we said, so they were having a go at breeding bird surveys, so sort of a walkthrough model. This is what you do, this is how you do it, and actually doing it as well. So that's that one. The next session, I think, is when we went to, we should play guess. Oh no, this was, oh, the extras, that was right. So we had this great idea, we'd have all the the sessions with our partners, but then opportunities presented themselves. So here, back in June, you'll remember that the orchids that year were, last spring, were phenomenal. And this is back at, as I said, Andrew Stubbings' farm, Manor Farm. And we put on an orchid walk in one summer evening. But this is Oscar as well, who is not just going, you're going to find more than just wildflowers, and he's got a great green bush cricket. Is that what it was that we decided it was? So there's opportunity to sort of explore. And if you think, you know, when do you stop bug hunting? You stop at primary school, but surely that's all what we then are doing as adults when we were surveying. It's just adult bug hunting. So that was a great walk. That was really lovely. This is where we should say guess the nature reserve. It's a BBOUT one, and this is where we did our butterfly transect training at Yosden Bank. Next slide, please. So again, we have Brenda from Butterfly Conservation and Stacey Hewitt BBOUT, who both came to share their knowledge and expertise. What I remember Brenda saying is that she calls herself an enthusiast rather than an expert, and I really like that as a message, that we don't all have to be experts and know everything about everything. You can just have a passion for your subject, and that's equally powerful. So here's just some nice pictures of us looking at the ground, as most of our photos of survey work always end up looking at a nice pair of butterflies as well. So next slide, please. What else have we been up to? Aha, this was the wildflower session. So a bit of a delay due to the weather. There had been a threat of thunderstorms, I think. So we were supposed to be doing a wildflower session with Fiona at Presswood Nature Reserve Children's Society site, but it was pushed back by a good 3 weeks. And unfortunately, by the time we got around to doing the wildflower ID, most of them had gone to seed. But it was still, so this time we went to Butler's Hangings instead for some wildflower training, which was fantastic. So there's Fiona sharing her knowledge, and in the next slide we've got some pictures. So it was fairly informal. We did throw down some quadrats to introduce them to that sort of method of surveying, and then there's Matt from Beamer as well in one of those photos on the right. So again, it was about an introduction really to wildflower survey methods, and I think we had the 3 field scabious were the only thing pretty much in the 3 scabious were only things flowering, if I remember. A bit of knapweed maybe. The next session, so have I mentioned, so we also were really looking at the Chilterns habitat. So chalk streams had to be there as well. So we were down in High Wycombe, just near our depot at Kingsmead Wreck, got them all in waders and got them into the river. And this was a great session because it's something different. It's looking at a river from a different perspective. In it looks so different from walking alongside it, and just a real sensory experience as well, just getting in the water, feeling what that's like. And this was a real deal, you know. We took them river fly monitoring. This stretch of river is due to be improved and enhanced in the coming months. So we were actually taking baseline data, river fly samples before the work carries out. So picture on the left of us all trudging upstream, and then we did a demonstration of how to do kick sampling, and the importance and the relevance of river flies, I suppose. And it was great because you immediately see how engaging it is to be able to then sift through samples, using the kit, and they're doing, you know, we're saying we're going to use this data and we'll take it again at different points to measure the impact, track the impact, I should have said, of the work that's going to take place, and hopefully they can be involved in the actual work as well, whether that's river revetment or putting in a berm, etc., or removing weirs or putting in deflectors. Hopefully they'll have that opportunity to join in with that sort of work. Where's our next one? Oh yeah, this was a lovely extra. So we were really lucky to join Tring Ringing Group at Willstone Reservoir with the BTO volunteers there. So they were there doing their mist netting, their usual recording and ringing. And I mean, we've said before, like the memory of seeing a bird up close, a bird in the hand like that, will just stay with you forever. And we did bring an element of luck. John Taylor mentioned that himself. On the right there, a water rail caught in the mist net. Fantastic. The first brambling ever recorded at Willstone Reservoir turned up on the day we were there. Thank you very much. First red wing of the seasons flew in, and then that beautiful little gold crest there, just absolutely stunning. So these are the things, you know, that are going to ignite that passion to carry them through for life. They might have a career in conservation, they may never do that again, but they're going to perhaps be the recorders of the future, is the hope. And then we had the shift from spring, summer to autumn, and it was like, so they are the habitats. Why are we getting those species there? Well, it's because we look after them and we have to manage them, and there is an active management program, and this is how you get involved, but also get involved. So back to Small Dean Bank this time. It's me lots of pictures of clearing scrub now. So that's a nice action shot. This was brilliant. You can't really see this. It was only a few weeks ago, back at Yosden Bank in a blizzard. I think it's probably the coldest conditions I've been out in as a ranger, but they were fantastic. They really were. Like, hopefully they'll come back. I don't think we've had a session since, but you can see the snow lying on the ground. We did have a fire, which absolutely did the job for us that day. But again, so they're using hand tools to learning a skill in that way, but also we have those key discussions about why and how we manage different habitats. You can see in the landscape, especially at Yosden, how that little isolated fragment among the farmed landscape is there, and sort of the connection between those landscapes and habitats, I think. Next slide, please. Oh yes, I nearly forgot to put this in the presentation actually. So we're going to be on Country File, which is a real result. 2nd of January, get the date in your diaries. So how did that happen? Oh, the researchers from the BBC phoned John at Chiltern Rangers, and their focus for the end of the year show, or the beginning of the year show, is inspirational young people. Do you have any? Yes, we have loads. Here you go. We've got our new shoots. So we went along to College Lake back in November, and it was a really great experience. So obviously the focus was on the new shoots, and they focused really on breeding bird surveys. So that's what we were doing on site, and it was just a really great day. So it wasn't for all of them. They didn't want all 16. I hope nobody works for the BBC who's watching this evening, but they also did it on a school day. But want to have a segment on inspirational young people, but did the filming on a school day. So there were lots of barriers to jump through, or hoops to jump through rather. But we got there and had a really great day with John Craven there, talking to Oscar and Becky, and a really good experience for our young people. I think it's fantastic and a real good result for the year, I think. So yeah, 2nd of January. And then what's next? So we've got this Monday, a couple of you mentioned Otmore already, so we're off to Otmore. We've got the Chiltern Rangers minibus to ship people around in. we've got Nick has arranged, so thank you, Nick, a kind of behind the scenes tour of RSPB Otmore for, again, a professional in post doing it as a living to talk to them about the site. I'm really excited. I've never been there, so that's a boon. And the river session is one of the last ones we have to come up, and then also we will finish off the year with like a next step. What is next for you? Whether a lot of them are looking to go to university, depending what age they are, but for some it's going straight into a job. So again, having those key conversations, finding out what they want, and it will never be goodbye either now. You know, they'll always be welcome back to volunteer with Chiltern Rangers. Hopefully next year, start doing a bit more serious surveying, if they're, you know what I mean by that, but also work experience. So we've had Tom, one of our new shooters, on 2 weeks work experience, and he's just spent an exhausting 3 days with me hedge laying. It was exhausting because it was hedge laying, not I'm exhausting. And Bethan, who you're about to meet, she's coming to join us for a work experience stint, and Lizzie as well. So already through the New Shoots programme, it's opening up opportunities for those young people, which was the dream, really, was the point of setting up in the first place. So it's been a great first year. We hope to run it again. Always things to learn from, and the people we'll be speaking to learn from are those New Shoots. So thank you very much.
Steph, thanks so much, Steph, for, we've got a bit of echo here. No, that's okay now. Steph, thanks so much for a great presentation. What an amazing initiative this New Shoots project is, and obviously your leadership of it, and everybody else's involvement and the training. And, you know, some of the things that spoke to me from it about designed by young people for young people, I think it's really, really vital. But the breadth of the experience that these young people are getting is really wonderful. And I'd like to hear from, or we'd like to hear from, two of the new shooters, as you're called. I think Freddie and Bethan are with us. So I'll go over to Freddie first of all. Maybe you could tell us, Freddie, about, you know, what this means to you, how you became involved, who's important to you in this process of helping you along the journey. So over to you, Freddie.
Yeah, well, I've always had a massive fascination with nature and wildlife. But the things, I'm really the only person I know who has a significant interest in things like this, like birding or species surveying, for example. So I've always really been on the hunt for like-minded people of my age to share my passion with, and the opportunity also to extend my knowledge. So when I heard about New Shoot, I thought it sounded perfect for me. It was exactly what I'd been wanting, really. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it so far. It's been amazing. Highlights have definitely been the various species identification sessions and the surveying sessions, particularly the birds and the butterflies, because it really gave me the chance to develop my skills, which was fantastic. And it showed me that there's such a vast amount to learn, and also that no matter how much you know, there's always more to learn. And I really like that about the natural world, especially.
Fantastic. Thanks, Freddie. That's very inspiring stuff. Bethan, how about you? How did you come to be involved in this, and you know, what's it done for you?
Well, I guess I wanted to learn a lot more about like the community where I lived and like the environment, you know, to go out on walks and be able to know what was around me. And I guess also like learning about the statistic side of it, because like you see the numbers and people tell you things, but unless you actually have the experience, it's pretty difficult to know how to interpret it and like actually what is going on. And I guess highlights, I think for me would be like the river surveying, because you take out the sample and you think, oh, there's not going to be much in there. But then you look into it and it's like a whole sort of like, I guess, mini biome. And it's like, well, it can't just be this river. It's got to be, you know, that little stream outside my house, or, you know, the rivers across the world. And you know, people, I mean, like, it's, you know, there's a lot of like-minded people, and people helping us like Steph and Nick are very helpful, and the local experts to come in.
Wow, you're both very, very knowledgeable, and I can tell passionate people about wildlife already, and it's so great that you're able to join with others and continue learning. What do you think? What do you think are the next steps for you two guys in taking what you've learned and what you've been able to achieve through this program on into other parts of your life? Freddie first.
Well, I definitely know I'd like to do something conservation related as a career, be that at a local, national or international level. I suppose the difficulty is really where exactly to specialise, because one thing the project's taught me is that there's so many different fields to specialise in. Each time you meet a new expert, that introduces another possibility. But yeah, I definitely like to study something to do with conservation or ecology at university. I think that would be a good foundation to go on and start a career in it.
Yeah, thanks, Freddie. That's very inspiring that something like this can nurture that interest and make it want to flourish into a career. My advice to you would be to follow that passion. That's what I did. When I did a zoology degree, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And if I'd have known then that 40, 50 years later, I'd still be doing this stuff, and I'm being inspired by young people like yourself, I think that's a wonderful thing. Bethan, how about you? Perhaps you're a little younger, I think, but maybe you've already got everything planned out too.
I think I'm quite interested in like the scientific and like the research aspect of it. So perhaps career-wise, I'd be interested in like ecology or biology, and trying to like I think I'd like to look at it in a more like in a very sort of a global scale, and just see how different places around the world are dealing with it.
Well, that's really also, very inspiring for somebody of your age to have that idea and be able to take your local experience and think about how to apply that at a global scale. I think this is extraordinary, and it indicates to me that this New Shoots, Chiltern New Shoots project, it's absolutely amazing to have this group of young people together, because we hear too much, don't we, about young people kind of being on their phones all the time, not being interested in the outdoors. And you may well be using your phones, but it seems to me you're probably using your phones to benefit your experience that this project is giving you in the outside world. And it's a really wonderful thing to hear about. What advice would you give to other young people who aren't yet involved here to get involved? Maybe your friends at school or in the local community. Bethan, what advice would you give to them?
I suppose just try to see what are available, because it's quite easy to think, oh, there's nothing available. There's just it's all meant for people that are going to change the world, and I'm not going to change the world. But you don't have to. If you just look at like local things, like you will find something, and then it's easier from there, I think.
Thank you, Freddie.
I'd say don't be disheartened by the fact that you're maybe the only person with this passion, this interest, because and instead to nurture it as best you can, because I know from experience it can be a bit disheartening when no one else around you is sort of interested in this sort of thing. So but that's why New Shoots has been so great for me. But I'd say nurture the passion as best you can, by reading as much as you can, or the best thing is to go out and put your skills to the test, really, and just do formal surveys, or even just keep a note of the wildlife that you see when you go on a daily walk. Things like that can really help to nurture it.
That sounds great. One of the things we all think about now, particularly after the COP26 in Glasgow, we are in the middle of a crisis on climate and biodiversity. I'm particularly pleased, actually, that the nature-based solutions and the nature part of the crisis has made it onto the kind of front page of COP, if you like. But how do you guys stay optimistic or positive in the current situation? Bethan, what would you say about that?
I think I don't know about other schools, but my school's putting quite a lot of emphasis on trying to teach us about climate change and about the world around us. So I think it's optimistic in the fact that and people are very willing to listen in my school, are very willing to listen to like that this is an issue and want to do something about it. I think I'm optimistic in the fact that like people want to change, people are trying to change, and I do feel that with like we will get there. I do feel that we as a group can make change.
Wow, that's very powerful, Bethan. Thanks. Freddie, what about you?
Well, I'd say that one thing that gives me hope and keeps me optimistic for the future is sort of seeing the impact of all of these different habitat management work that we're doing over our sessions that we've seen. In the summer, we saw the impact of these sessions and the fact that there were swathes of these butterflies and birds and lots of different species. And that's all down to sort of this conservation work that's taking place at lots of reserves across the Chilterns. And also the fact that all these people we've met, these experts and enthusiasts, that's really inspiring, I think, to know that there are so many people out there who are really passionate about this and who are willing to take part in all these surveys and volunteering to benefit the environment and to benefit the climate.
Well, Bethan and Freddie, listening to you two guys been one of the most inspiring things for me this week. Quite often we hear that this crisis, the biodiversity and climate crisis, my generation has kind of messed up. And now it's over to you guys, and that's not a sensible characterization for me. The characterization for me is, we're at a point in human history where we first of all understand the nature of the problem and also understand what we have to do to fix it. And I think both of you have said things in line with that feeling. But for me, the most important thing about this is that Steph and the Chilterns New Shoots project brings together different generations to work together, to inspire us to actually take action ourselves out in the environment. And those tiny actions can be disproportionately important in helping us all as a society respond to the challenges ahead. So I'd like to end this piece really by commending this fantastic work that we've heard about this evening. Volunteers in the main Chilterns project that we talked about initially, and then Steph's New Shoots project, and hearing from two of the young people here about this lovely, lovely work that they're doing and the joining together of the community, whatever age, wherever you come from, being able to have something to participate in here, a community that is changing the Chilterns for the better as part of our total kind of response to what we need to do for the world. So Nick, I hope that rounds off this first part of the day, the evening nicely. We've run over a little bit into the break time, but I'm sure everybody was very pleased to be able to do that, because hearing from Bethan and Freddie at the end there was one of the most important things this evening. Thank you very much indeed.
Andy, thank you very much for that. And Marika, Susie, Tim, especially Freddie and Bethan, your stars. Absolutely, so I actually echo everything you've said, Andy, there. Having been working with you for the last kind of 6 months or so, it's been great to spend a bit of time with you and see that passion for real on the ground. So thank you again for all your time. And Andy, thank you for yours. You're going up an evening to come and inspire us and talk to us tonight, which is over and above the call of duty. So thank you very much for your time, your support, your words, your context, your inspiration. It's much appreciated. A virtual round of applause, everybody. Yeah, if you can hear where you're coming out on that one, brilliant. Thank you all. So in terms of timings, we're only slightly over, so we're not too far. So if I can suggest that we're back and ready to go at 10:02, if that's okay. It's a slightly shorter break, but obviously we're on Zoom, so if you need to kind of do it, you can always turn your cameras off and nip off and make a brew. But if we aim to start again at 10:02, and I'll introduce the second session where we'll take a lot of that work and apply it in more of a farming context, and for all the support you've been giving our farmers as well. So thank you for your time in that first session. Andy, thank you again. Much appreciated. Have a great Christmas, Andy. And Freddie, Bethan, brilliant. Feel free to stay on if you want to. And we'll see you at 10:02. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so it's 10:02, and I can see quite a few of you have come back, but hopefully most of you are back from your getting a brew or stretching your legs. So it's great to change tax right now for the second half of the session. And a number of you on the call and others who can't make it tonight have been involved in the project from a slightly different angle. So if the first session was more around structured, formal kind of surveys filling in with national schemes, equally powerful is the work that a number of you have been doing supporting our farmers. So in the farmers in the farmer cluster we've been working with to really kind of, as Andy spoke about, kind of make that kind of connection between records and what's on a farm and actually helping farmers understand what's on the farm and really support wider work that's really starting to drive habitat creation on the problem. So a number of projects there. So second half of the session really is going to focus more on your work as volunteers and farmers working together to find out what's out there on the farms and start to plot and build that picture of what's happening in the Chilterns from a slightly more informal perspective, but equally as powerful perspective, really getting to understand what's out there in the farm fields across the Chilterns patch. So I'll hand over to Ian. Is now ringing me. I was going to hand over to Ian, but Ian is now ringing me. 1 second. May well be that he can't join. Can somebody play some lift music? 1 second. There we go. Just when Zoom was going quite well up to that point, the gremlins hit. So Ian, are you back with us? Can you hear us?
I can now.
You can now. You're back with us. Brilliant. Thank you. Well persevered. That's not too bad. That could have.
Sorry about that.
No problem. So we're just about to literally hand over to you when you called, which was quite interesting. But way of introduction, I've been lucky enough in my career to work with probably 2 or 3 people who I genuinely would say have been kind of inspirational in my career, whether it's in sport or now. And Ian is one of those very few, actually, from your passion, Ian, your drive, your respect, your expertise to really kind of make a difference and really work with you and your fellow farmers in the area to get farmers on the front foot, but engage and really kind of drive and support a lot of the projects we've been working on from a wildlife perspective. It's been genuinely inspirational to me, and I'm hoping is likewise with other farmers in the group and other people in the area and volunteers on the call. So from me, a thank you for your time and effort and support in really making a lot of what we're about to talk about in the next kind of hour or so happen. It makes a massive difference. And if our yellowhammers, if our corn buntings, if our butterflies, our plants could speak, they would echo exactly that you're driving that area. So thank you for that, really, and hand over really to you really to walk us through the next session on sharing some of your passion. And Will and Wendy, thank you for joining us likewise in this session here, just to share a bit about your thoughts and passion for the projects, and then we'll hand over to a number of other guys on the call to share more specifics about the kind of things they've been doing to make a difference on the ground. But Ian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nick. I'm sort of still blushing from that. Anyway, welcome everybody. Just to give you a little bit of information on what our cluster farm is really about and what drives me to sort of make it work. There's 18 farms. We all farm together 6,500 hectares in the central region of the Chilterns. Most of us are joined up. Some of us have some woodland between us, but the only one who's sort of slightly disconnected from us is William Lee. He can't help where he is, of course. But continuity across the area is important, and it is quite interesting, which we're going to mention how some of our species do travel quite widely and don't necessarily respect farmland boundaries. The key thing that sort of drove me to get this all going was obviously the Heritage Lottery Fund. I was quite hopefully influential in winning the bid, along with Nick and other members of staff from the Conservation Board. I am a board member myself as well, and I really saw it as a way of ring fencing some money to be spent on agricultural type projects on farms. And that's not a handout to farmers, but it's about doing environmental work, nature work on farms that farmers wouldn't normally be able to afford to do. And also breaking down, as part of that, breaking down some of the barriers between the sort of us and them type scenario, where farmers are sort of frightened to let volunteers and ecologists onto their farms just in case they find something that will stop them farming in a certain way. And then the ecologists and bird watchers are all sort of frightened of farmers because they're sort of unapproachable and all horrible people. And I think we've broken that down fairly well. It's been a real interesting thing for me to sort of stand on the outside and observe that in action. The other thing that sort of quite motivates me is to get my fellow farmers to engage in nature and understand what they've got on their farms, because they're so used to being told they're not fit for purpose, they ruin the countryside, do nothing but damage, certainly don't do any good. And we've broken down a lot of those barriers by welcoming these volunteers and ecologists onto our farms to find things. The thing that really sort of excites me in a way is when my fellow farmers give me a good ribbon because they've actually got more of something on their farm than I have, because I'm always seen to be quite nature friendly. But when they can tell me they've got more birds on their farm from a bird survey, it really brings it home to me that that they've actually bought into it and engaged. They think they've got one over on me, but in actual fact, I've got one over on them because I've got them to engage and take ownership of what they've got on their farm. So that sort of it's a double-edged sword, but I'm certainly the winner, although I appear to be the loser, and I'm happy to be the loser in that circumstance that I haven't got the bird count or the reptile count that they've got, but I've got quite a lot going on nevertheless. So that type of thing breeds a competitive edge, and that breeds more engagement. So that's a sort of really big step forward for all of us as farmers to understand and engage with what we've got going on our farms and take ownership for it. The two people we've brought along tonight to sort of share their experiences with you, as I mentioned already, William Lee and Wendy Gray. Wendy's actually closer to me than William. William farms over near Amersham at Penn Estate, and Wendy farms with her brother at Road Farm on the just outskirts of Great Missenden, and there's a small piece of land between us, but that farmer is also a cluster farmer as well. So we are connected, as many of us are in so many ways. And doing the sort of projects we're doing across the wider landscape brings a significant value in the connectivity of wildlife corridors. And it's quite inspiring, really, to see that everybody's really buying into it. All different levels, don't get me wrong, it's not all a bed of roses, but everybody's got their own pace to go at, and I for one do recognise that. And we're all individuals, we've all got our own agendas and way we want to farm, but at the same time we're all keen to be seen to be doing the right thing, and for people to come and find really good things on our farms really floats our boats. So I'll start with ladies first. Wendy, would you like to sort of say what the cluster has done for you, and sort of pluses, the big pluses that have happened on your farm?
Yes, hello everybody. So my brother is the one who does the serious farming here. I'm in charge of something called care farming. So we have people from all sorts of different backgrounds who come and spend a bit of time here getting involved. But we've all hugely enjoyed seeing other people get enthusiastic about the countryside around us, and that there are other people who are willing to go out in the cold, in the wet, as well as in the blazing hot sunshine, and wander around trying to make head or tail of maps that they've got that perhaps that haven't been done quite as accurately as they should have done, and find their way around and make records of things that we haven't got time to take records of, even if we could, or if we wanted to. So we are hugely grateful for all of you here on the call, that you're actually going out there and making records, because as was said before by Andy and by others, it really does make a difference to many different, whether it's planning, whether it's just being able to conserve these animals and provide better kinds of management to encourage their habitats, so that there's more of them, so that there's more of the next thing down the line in the food chain. It all makes a difference, and it's just very encouraging to see other people want to come out and write and spend many hours writing these things down that we don't have time to do. That's the sort of number one answer to that we do appreciate you volunteers, and we've especially appreciated being able to let other people see that wildlife is important, because we do have school children here on the farm, we do have people with special needs, and for them to realise that they are part of a bigger project, for instance with scattering wild bird seed, that it does make a difference, that somebody else is interested in wild birds, not just them, and that there is a follow-up to what's happening is great. You know, it reaches far and wide when people are actually getting involved. There's a whole lot of questions. Ian, are you going to tell me if we're going to go through these questions?
No, I'll ask you another question in a minute, but William, would you like to sort of explain how it's made a difference to you having these volunteers and the survey work done on your farm?
Yeah, okay. So I'm quite fortunate in that I get to manage this estate for the owner, but it puts different pressures on me. So whatever I have to do has to be commercial, obviously, otherwise I'd lose my job. But equally, I have a passion in knowing what's there. And I think, as Ian mentioned, there's always been this theme and others. And farmers have always been slated. Sometimes it's justified, but not always. And as farmers, we see the wildlife, we see the birds out there, but it's good to get these volunteers in to confirm it, if you like. I don't have the time, and certainly not the knowledge or the experience to go and identify what all these birds are and the flowers and the butterflies, and to have somebody come in and give me their time and share their knowledge is quite incredible.
Thank you. Bill. We've all been taking part, us three have all taken part, been lucky enough to take part in the ringing exercises for birds. And any sort of highlights on your farm, Wendy, when the bird ringing was done?
Probably the yellowhammers. So this almost answers another question further on, but we've always known that we see lots of yellowhammers, but for everybody else to realize that the farmer's actually telling the truth. You know, he does know there are yellowhammers here, and there really are yellowhammers here, is great. But to see them close up, to see that vivid color and all the variety in their feathers is just absolutely stunning.
And Bill, ringing's taken place on your farm as well, and I think you've got a bit of a journey on one of your yellowhammers. I'm pretty sure it's on your farm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Peter's been here today actually, but it's fascinating. I've never experienced them with the mist nets before, and so doing the ringing, and it's great to see these birds up close. But I think Peter's has caught a yellowhammer here, and it's been as well 10 kilometres away, I believe, at a different farm. So yeah, these birds are moving around. They're not just sat in one spot. But yeah, it's really nice to see.
And Wendy, again, what you thinking about sort of towards next spring? What do you think you might be looking forward to see as something that to be a bit of one-upmanship on me, perhaps?
Well, I guess it
doesn't have to be in the bird front. It can be in other areas.
This is where everybody needs to understand here. It's really crucial that you understand that within the cluster group, there is a WhatsApp group. So all the farmers are on this WhatsApp group, and they ping out photographs of their recent findings, which means that everybody else on the WhatsApp group thinks, oh, I wish we had that on our farm, or what can we do to make it better? And it's brilliant. It's just excellent, isn't it, Ian and Lee? It just gets you going. You want to do better, but it's really, really, really crucial for farmers and everyone to understand that obviously everything depends on the soil underneath and the geology under that soil. And if you haven't got what it takes to make that plant grow or to provide that food plant for the bird, maybe you won't ever get it. Maybe you will if you manage it a different way. So it's a way of getting everybody to understand that. And it really works with this WhatsApp group. And it's also great for people to be able to communicate again and understand that there is an interest there.
Thank you, Wendy.
But what do I want? What I want, sorry, coming back to that, Ian, I have not yet been close up to a barn owl, and that's what I would like to be able to do.
Excellent. Well, we've got the man on in a minute who's going to make that happen. No pressure there, Norman. Right, Bill, well, you've got barn owls, I know, I have as well. I'm trying to keep mine to myself and not let Wendy have them. She's got to get her own. So,
we've got them. I just haven't been there.
You want to be
right
close
time.
to one. You want to be there when they're bringing the chicks. Yeah, that is a quite amazing process. Bill?
What would I like to have that you haven't got? More worms. That's what I'd like to have that you haven't got.
Yeah, that's a big ask. You got to farm a lot better than you currently are, obviously.
Thank you. No, yeah, it's just, I think, you know, we're doing supplemental feeding, which is great. I think we just like to see more numbers of yellowhammers, just more of the sort of rarer birds coming in that we haven't seen before.
Yeah. So for everybody who's here, my sort of personal goal would be for the guy who's my bird guy who's fairly resident on my farm. I think he walks through most days. I'm not sure he's on the call or not, but you know, he's always sending me WhatsApp messages of what he's found. But you know, Merlin passing through last year was quite a notable thing. Yes, we got breeding barn owls, but that's, you know, a bit of an up and down, as you all will understand, with, you know, vole numbers and mice numbers on the farm. But we will go on to talk a bit about that as well, because that is an important part of our surveying. But you know, I dearly like corn bunting here, and I know that's a big ask, but they're not far away. But it's just getting them to move up out of the sort of Bradnam Valley, back over to this way a bit more. But you know, it's not their natural habitat being in amongst all this woodland. But we can but hope. So that sort of leads me on quite nicely to start introducing some of the other speakers we've got for you this evening. And I think they're all on screen at the moment. And they are pretty much interrelated in that one towards the end is predated by the sort of the preceding one. So that's quite interesting. But you can't, I always say that if you want barn owls and kestrels and those big raptor predators, you've got to start with flowers. And the flowers then become seed, and then small birds and small mammals eat that seed. And then you get your big barn owls and kestrels at the top of the food chain. So let's start at the top of the food chain with Norman Shepherd, who's our resident barn owl expert, who's put up quite a few boxes on our farms, and I love seeing them up a ladder balanced on top of a Land Rover. I noticed he's got some safety rails on it now, so there's some slight improvements on that there. So Norman, I'll let you take over. Oh, you're on mute, Norman.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, excellent.
Okay, good. Yes, good evening, everybody. My name's Norman Shepherd, and I am a volunteer with the Bucks, Owl and Raptor Group. We're a group of volunteers based in Aylesbury. About 12 of us scattered around the county, and our vocation is to improve the environment, to improve the prospects of barn owls, but not just barn owls. We work with 4 species of raptor: barn owl, tawny owl, kestrel and little owl, and these birds all predominantly nest in holes. And our vocation is to work along with landowners to erect boxes on their properties to compensate for the loss of trees over the last many years. For instance, the Dutch elm disease back in the 70s destroyed millions and millions of elm trees. Elm trees used to be the lifeline of lots of the birds that we're talking about, and they've all disappeared. And our vocation is to try and replace them. Also to compensate and mitigate for barns that are being converted because of the change of land management by farmers who no longer need to keep their animals in barns, or indeed keep their straw hay dry because it's now wrapped in plastic. So we have around 800 boxes across the county of Buckinghamshire. And we were approached, sorry, let's go back to this. We make the boxes ourselves. We make the boxes, me and another guy make those boxes you speak about. And up until about 3 or 4 years ago, those boxes have traditionally been made out of 12 mil plywood, exterior grade hardwood boxes, and they would last 10, 12, 15 years. But just recently we realized that the quality of that wood was pretty bad, and we found a product which is in actual fact called stockboard, which we've used to replace the wood. And this is turned into a plastic product, but it's made basically from the waste plastic that is wrapped around those hay bales, those straw bales, that silage bales, and also fertilizer bags that farmers generate in the work that they do, and which has been causing them big problems. And obviously disposable waste plastic has caused in the country a big headache. So we found this product, and this is a dynamic product. It's fantastic, and it replaces wood. And we thought it was new 3 years ago, but in actual fact, lots of farmers are aware of it and have been using it. And we've actually got one landowner who's donated some to us that he had 20 years ago that he used in his pig farm production. He's since come out of that, and this is now surplus to requirements. And it's new to us, and it's probably new to most of you, but landowners have been using this product. Move on, Nick. And so we started building boxes in this about 3 years ago, and this is just about the time when we were approached by Nick to get involved with the children's conservation product, and we were approached in terms of would we work along with the project to provide boxes to help on the children escarpment, and that's 6,500 hectares, working along with the farmers and landowners. So in that time, in the last 3 years, me and Nick have met up with the landowners, and we've surveyed their farms, and we have erected about 69 boxes across 15 farms. Still 2 or 3 left to go, and 1 or 2 extra to be able to fill in places where we believe we might have missed a trick. So we've got 33 barn owl boxes erected, and 14 tawny owl boxes, 21 kestrels, and just 1 little owl box. And these are put up in tawny owl boxes. Let me just inform you, go up mainly in woodland. The other 3 species are more of open land, open farmland, meadows on the edges, frequented by barn owls, etc., on the fringes of fields, and ideally land which is farmed for animals. What we were saying earlier is that where you've got animals, you've invariably got manure, and you get flies, and you get lots more voles. And the short-tailed vole is the creature that supports all the birds that we provide nest boxes for. And this is a boom and bust species. It lives in fields, in tufts of grass, and on the hedge lines, and it drives the populations of the birds which we are involved with. We've just gone through in 2019 was a big boom year for the barn owl, and for all the species we're talking about, when the population of voles peaked. In 2020, the population plummeted in the autumn and winter and spring. We were unable to do very much monitoring that year because of COVID, of course. And when we did, we found that in 2019 we rang over 200 barn owls, but in 2020 we only rang 28. Now, some of that was because of circumstances, but some of it was because their food source, the population of food source of the short-tailed vole, had indeed collapsed. And we were expecting an improvement on that this year, and it is a slight improvement, but not a tremendous amount. But in that over those 2 or 3 years, we've erected, as I said, all those boxes, 69 boxes. And I think you may be able to see a map of where those boxes are located on the farms within the cluster group. So the barn owls are the Green Mountains, the kestrels are the red diamond, that's what I call it. Little owl, just the one in a barn, and unfortunately that's not shown any sign of occupancy. And tawny owls in the woodland within the cluster group. Now, in the last 2 years, it's been a pretty bad time to actually try and justify what we've done, because the season, the short-tailed vole, as I said, has suffered in that period of time. But we still have had 11 successful nests across the patch. And you may well be able to see some of the farmers and landowners cuddling, in some instances, barn owls. I think that's all we've got in front of us here now. So and there can be no better feeling for us, because the work that we do is about trying to find the right trees, the right habitat, put the box in the right place to encourage these birds to nest. It's always shot in the dark. I'm not an expert by any means, but I think I've got a gut feeling for what might be the right place to work, to put a box. And it's quite gratifying when we go to these boxes and suddenly we find that we're successful. When we approach the boxes, we put a foam blocker in the hole to stop the owls from leaving the nest. And the idea of that is that obviously these owls are all nocturnal. We don't want them flying around in daytime, but also that keeps them in the box and allows us to catch them. And then we'll remove the birds and check and see if they've got rings already on them, and if they have, we'll record that information. And if they haven't, then we will ring them. And subsequently, the nestlings, we'll go back when the nestlings are a reasonable age, 3-4 weeks for kestrel and 6-7 weeks for barn owls, and 4 or 5 weeks for tawny owls. And we wait until they're relatively mature, because there's a certain amount of mortality within nest boxes due to the amount of food that is available at the time. But anyway, so all this information, you've got pictures there of Luke Mariner, I think, putting a ring on a kestrel chick. And it's surprising just how calm most of these chicks and adults are in the nest. They very rarely put up a fight. They don't seem to be too aggravated about what happens. And when we've finished the ringing and taken all the biometrics, the weight of the bird, the length of the wings, the age, the sex, and all that sort of stuff, this is all recorded. And this information is sent back to the British Trust for Ornithology and goes into the catalogue of information which they keep, which helps them to identify trends within this raptor population. But I have to say that, that for us, this is the time of year when, in the spring and summer, when success is monitored by a feeling of joy of opening that box and finding there's barn owls present with chicks or tawny owls, any other species. And it's quite an uplifting event for us. And I hope, and I'm sure it is, a great feeling for the farmers and landowners. And the other thing that we find is that we want to try and, I mean, listening to some of the guys, they are aware of the birds on their farm, but if you can actually put that bird in their hand, it makes them even more and more aware, I think, and it makes them think about, shall I cut that hedge along the side of that main road quite as low as I do? Shall I raise it a little bit? Because barn owls hunt about 4 feet off the ground, 5 feet off the ground, and they're a bit haphazard in what they do. But if there's a field the other side of the road that may well be interesting to them, they're just as likely to maintain that height, fly across that road, and we all know what can happen if we're not careful. So landowners, when they realize what they've got, how precious it is in their hand, I think it makes them think a little bit more about raising the height of that hedge a little bit, and thinking that they don't want to lose, they want to continue having this experience year after year after year. Next slide, please, Nick. So that's what we do. And we've had some pretty good experiences, as I've said. Now, the picture in front of you may or may not be a good experience at the moment, bearing in mind the trauma that this gentleman is under. But we met him back in the spring at Chequers when he'd just been on a 3 or 4 or 5 mile run. He looked like he'd been on a run anyway. So Boris was there, and his wife, and forgot the name of his little boy now, but it's been superseded by a little girl now, I believe. So we've got a presence on Chequers. Unfortunately, it was nothing that we could brag about this time, other than a pair of stock doves, I think, in a barn owl box, which was pretty dilapidated, and proved the point that had that box been made of stockboard that 5 years ago, then it would still be in good condition and wouldn't need replacing very, very soon. I think the job that we do is pretty important. And what we've got now is a slide of some extraordinary stuff that we find. This isn't from the children's group. This is from experience around the patch previously. But if you look at the first box on the left-hand side, this is a box of young barn owl chicks from about 2 days old up to about 10 or 12 days old. But in front of me, you'll see that gory scene of 35 various types of small mammal, mostly short-tailed voles. Now, the adult male is the guy who provides all that food. He works pretty well on his own because mum is in the nest feeding those chicks for the first 3, 4, 5 weeks, and she would still have been in that box at the time. But I have to tell you this, that box full of voles did not lead to the success you would have thought it would, because when we returned to that box about 5 weeks, 6 weeks later to ring the chicks, there was only one chick left standing. And that was because it was the end of 2019 when the drop in the vole population started. And although there was plenty of voles 5, 6 weeks before, as you can see, it tailed off quite dramatically and led to the loss of all of the other chicks with the exception of one. The box in the middle is just shows what birds will do in times of adversary. Now, this is a box that has got both barn owl chicks and kestrel chicks in it. They both sat side by side in the same box at about the same time. They called a truce. They brought up the chicks, and you can see the result there. It's an extraordinary picture. Never thought I'd see anything like it, but it just goes to prove what does happen. And we have seen other things similar, but not other birds of prey, but sharing boxes with other birds, stock doves and jackdaws. 2 examples that we've seen recently. And on the right-hand side here, you've got a box that was put on a pole next to a river in Padbury. And this is in 2019. The box had only been up a year, and I climbed the ladder, and in it was, I couldn't work out what it was. I was totally flummoxed. But it happened to be a goosander. And the bird, as you can see, held in my hand was, I took it out. I didn't know how it got in the box. It was so big, but we got it out. A fantastic looking bird. She was sitting on a nest of 8 eggs. And I believe she's one of the first goosanders to nest in the county of Buckinghamshire. Subsequently, they 1 or 2 more. They're moving down from Scotland and starting to repopulate the south. But it was an extraordinary, exciting thing for us to find. And she subsequently hatched those chicks. And there's another picture of them going up through the Padbury Brook a few weeks later. So what we do is very, very exciting. We enjoy it, and what we want to do is to improve the lot of those birds and make the farmers and landowners around the county, across the country as a whole, think of them as being gold dust in their hands, and that they've got an opportunity to make the population of barn owl that was so very, very low much, much better in the future by improving the management and working along with the techniques that the chalk cherries and chairs incentive is providing them with, and thereafter when this incentive initiative completes in 2, 3, 4 years' time. Thanks very much from everybody. If you've got any questions, then I'm here to be quoted.
Yeah, I think we'll save questions to the end, Norman. Thank you very much for that.
Okay.
And we'll now move on to Pete Edwards, who's a bird ringer. I don't suppose you've had a goosandering in nets by any chance, have you, Pete? Yeah, still on mute.
Yeah, so I'm afraid I haven't had one of those, and then probably I would have had a large hole in my net. But do the same level of damage as a pheasant.
Yeah. So take it away then and tell us what you've been doing ringing birds in our patch, really, and what you found.
Rightio.
Thank you.
Am I going to share my screen, Nick, or are you going to put me on like everybody else?
You try, Pete, because at my end it doesn't seem to want to click through. So you try, and if it doesn't work, I'll do something at my end.
Okay.
No, you're good there, Pete. Thank you.
The only trouble is I've come in at the end. So close your eyes for 10 seconds.
Zoom that back up. Yeah. Excellent.
Okay. So yeah, it's been a great experience working with all you farmers, because one thing that volunteers don't have always a lot of access to is lots of places to ring. And I was just, you know, Andy Clement said at the beginning, he said bringing volunteers and farmers together is a great thing. And I suddenly thought, well, it's long overdue, because I used to go to the BO, the British Ornithological Union's Lowland Bird Conference, where they were always looking for the solutions to why certain species have been declining. And it very rarely included farmers. So it really is good to have this kind of engagement. So basically, what we've done is tracking the impact of winter feeding on farmland birds on the cluster farms has been our objective. And as we know, a lot of open field lowland farmland species have declined over recent decades. Well, recent if you're in your 70s, but and particularly of interesting are the which we still see every day: skylarks, linnets, yellowhammers, corn buntings, maybe a little bit more regional, but they're certainly not considered rare birds, but they have declined and they are red listed. So these are the targets that we're really trying to look at to try and improve. Now, the RSPB coined the phrase the big three conservation needs, and this very simply puts down what those main requirements are. First of all, a safe place to nest, free from too much predation, and maybe free from being harvested too early. So if you think of cutting grass and maybe with harvesting dates coming forwards, and with climate change as well, with unpredictable changes, it puts a lot of pressure on how many broods a bird might be able to get out. Then food in the spring and summer for growing chicks is important, because most of these birds require insects for their chicks, and those insects are often dependent on the weeds that might be in the crop or on the edges of the crop. And then the food and shelter over the winter is also critical. And so obviously the loss of overwinter stubbles has had a big impact. So overwinter stubbles are very important, and it's good to see more and more interest in minimal tillage and direct drilling in as well, which is good. Also, wild bird seed margins are important, and winter feeding stations, although a little bit artificial, are also very important. So these are the things that we so the food and shelter over winter are what we've been looking at as ringers, and also as where we've been making observations. So more specifically, the hungry gap. This is the period usually between February and April. And so it's at the end of the winter when a lot of food is running short. So first of all, we see that stubbles disappear, and weedy stubbles are nice for birds. They might not be so nice for your yields later on. But anyway, if you've got winter cereals going in, then the stubbles will go quite early, probably in the late autumn. If they're overwinter stubbles, say for spring crops, a lot later, so that's good. And also if you're planting up cover crops, that could also be of great value as well, if you're the right ones. Then the margins are good too. I mean, there's different mixes you can put in, and of course it can be quite difficult to get a good establishment of some crops, of some margins in some years, and often the food sources in those strips can actually run out a bit earlier than you would like, and that's where the seed feeders can come in and to actually keep some resources going for the species like yellowhammers, not for skylarks alas, but for certainly yellowhammers and to some extent corn buntings. So the next thing I'd like to just talk about is the max. We've actually been counting to show the benefits of the overwinter stubbles, I've been doing counts on barley stubble at Manor Farm and Old Caladown Farm, and we'll get these extraordinarily good numbers. Now, you wouldn't count these numbers of birds by walking around the edge of your fields, but I'll show you in a moment a video which I've got showing how I managed to count the skylarks. But I mean, the skylark population, I mean, if you enter this into Bird Track, the first thing that comes up, it says, can you check your figures because they're too high for Buckinghamshire? In fact, for all those figures, that you would get that response. Now, the skylarks, you'll get a lot of skylarks coming in. They're not all British skylarks, probably, but we don't really know. But a lot of skylarks come in from continental Europe in the winter. The meadowpipit numbers are usually highest in the autumn when they're moving through. The linnets, again, they're very gregarious, and you get a number of those. They might be British, they might be coming from continental Europe. Some of our linnets go down to Iberia to get warmer climates, but that might be changing now. Chaffinches, of course, now they do like the stubbles, and but also they're able to forage in the beech woods too, because when beech mast is available, so they've got a very general. They've got a buffered food supply to some extent. Then yellowhammers and corn buntings are much more sedentary. And so, as I'll show in a little while from our ringing data, they're much more sedentary. And so they're very much the breeding population probably that we're dealing with, which are actually collecting together onto these good stubbles. And alas, we lost our soil buntings many decades ago, and wouldn't it be nice if we could bring some of those back with a reintroduction project, which might be as successful as the red kites. But anyway, now this is a 2-animal piece of surveying here. These are skylarks at Manor Farm, and my dog is very good at quartering and disturbing them, so it gives me a much better chance to actually record how many there are. And I also use a recorder playing skylark if I see the skylarks going up. That way I can get a good count. And as you can see, this is phenomenal, really. And I'll take a breath there. Right. Now, the next thing is the actual ringing that we do. Now, we want to do this ringing because we're really looking at want to see what the benefits of the feeding is. And you can see here, this is Road Farm. We've got some stubble here, we've got a cover crop, and here we've got the feeder. Now, this work's been done on 6 different farms. We've got Lynn Lambert working on Bookmore End Farm, Paul Watts on Hampden Bottom Farm, John Taylor and Mike Carr on Collingwood Hanger Estate, and myself and Jenny Spencer-Jones, plus some other members of the Hyundai Ringing Group on Manor Farm, Road Farm and Penn Street Farm. Now, ringing in farmland is not easy because you've not got so much cover to make your nets less visible, and it's more open to the wind. So it means that it's hard to get good days out. And what you can see here, I've got the numbers that we've caught on the 6 farms altogether over 2 winters. You can see that our yellowhammer population, our target species, the yellowhammer, the linnet, the corn bunting, and the chaffinch are certainly the yellowhammer and the chaffinch do well. But all the other species are largely hedgerow and woodland birds, and it just goes to show you can't keep a good blue tit down. So what we're trying to do here is to estimate the population, if we can, and the distribution through where the birds, when we recapture them, where they're moving to. So, as we caught mostly yellowhammers, we're using that as our example. And it's really early days because this is our baseline and the first 2 winters of data. And as we continue on over the next few years, we'll be able to collect more and get more consistent data. And so what we've tried to do here is to estimate what the population might be. Now, from catching about 100 birds each winter, we've only actually had 4 recaptured birds. 3 of those were on the farm where they were ringed, either Manor Farm, Penn Street or Road Farm, and 1 which actually travelled. This is the famous one that travelled from Road Farm to Penn Street Farm, which is 8 kilometres the way a straight line flies, but who knows? I'm sure the yellowhammer didn't actually fly straight there because it took a year. And so we do this estimate by what's called the Lincoln Index, where we multiply the first year captures by the second year and divide it by the number of the first winter birds we captured in the second winter. We actually are in breach of some of the rules because we've done it on a year basis, but it gives you it gives us a rough estimation for a preliminary estimate, which we'll follow up in future years. And actually, I'll get in touch with the BTO and see if we can actually improve our method. And but if you actually compare this number with, say, some of the maximum counts that I just showed for yellowhammers, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that these are the sorts of numbers that might be in this catchment area. The other thing that I looked at just today, actually, I wanted to check on what the ringing recoveries were nationally for this, and about 3,000 out of just over 3,000 recoveries, about 3,000 of them were all within the same county. So it's at this sort of level. Okay, this is not a county, but it's in that same range. And only 5 have ever been recovered outside of the UK. So really they are sort of fairly sedentary species, and this sort of movement of about 8 kilometres is around about the typical thing, which means that the birds in this area, it's not a closed population, but you know, you could think of it as a closed population for doing a rather badly constructed Lincoln Index. Right, now the next thing we're interested in doing is looking at the age and sex classes for the yellowhammers, because first of all, we want to get an idea of the survival. So maybe looking at how adults have survived over, you know, in 5 years' time, we'll have 5 years worth of data, and it will start to mean more. And the proportion of first year birds to the adults might indicate something about how well the breeding season was. Now that sounds very good, but the only trouble is, as most ringers will know, yellowhammers are little, excuse the expression, sods to age and sex sometimes. So what we have to do is to look at the tail feathers here. Now these are known old birds because I've retrapped them for a number of years, and you can see they've got much more rounded and better quality tails. And generally, the molt's more even, although they can still molt. You have accidental molt. Whereas the first year birds, because they grow their tails in the nest, and so they grow them much earlier, whereas these adults will not actually replace their feathers until 2 or 3 months later. They're in much better condition. These are very pointed, but they'll molt as well. So if we see these juvenile pointed feathers within the tail, it gives us an indication that they're young birds. But of course, later on in the winter, when they get abraded, it gets much more difficult. Likewise, getting the sex right, it can be a bit tricky too. Now here, there's a big contrast here. That's a fairly typical adult male, showing a very yellow head with a few buff fringes on it, which will sort of wear off as the summer gets closer to the summer. Whereas the female here has got much darker centers, although this is a fairly dull one, but you find out that there are quite a lot of males and females, which adult females are looking a bit like first year males too. So you can sort of understand, I was very disappointed when I saw this sort of change here, that why have we suddenly got lots more first year males in the second year? So there may be an element of not very good aging and sexing, but also what we did more in the second year was to use song recordings to attract the birds in. and that usually attracts more males. So that's a bit of a complicating factor. So what we've decided to do now is to routinely, so we're doing it consistently. We've got usually two sets of nets up. One of them we'll put the yellowhammer tape on, the other one we won't. So we're actually consistently using the tape at the same level. So that might help us get more, that might make the data more consistent. Right, now this is the super little bird. Well, it's actually a super little big bunting, really. And the first time out on Manor Farm, or at Smalding Lane, nice hedges here, aren't they? We caught 10 male and 7 females in the first year, and we thought, this is terrific. Let's do a colouring project. And the idea here was, we got it registered. We were going to just colouring the males, because they sit on the wires, and we can easily, with a pair of binoculars or scope, actually identify which bird they were, so that we could actually look at the distribution of these wintering birds in the valley. The only problem is we didn't catch any more in the second year when we had our colouring project, so we still haven't put a colouring on them. Now, Jenny and myself, we're ringing down here, and up on the wires here, you've got these corn muntings. And I think, not wishing to be too anthropomorphic, they're looking down, and when you think, if we've rung 17 of them and there's only 34, one saying to the next one, hey, they're back again. Let's wait till they've gone before we go down and feed. And that's the sort of thing, you know, they are quite smart, but anyway, that might be the reason. And anyway, we're still trying. We might have to try something a bit clever, like using whoosh nets or something. But you can see here, this is one, I don't know how I managed, oh, sorry, I didn't do it. Anyway, that one had a flying one, was a corn bunting with a ring up. Right, now I'm just going to, so basically, all I would say now is that that's really from the preliminary first 2 years. We're in our third year now, and we'll be generating more data, and let's hope that we can actually come up with some more good analysis. Now, I've got some nice pretty pictures here. Now, the good thing about being a bird ringer is you don't need a long telephoto lens on your camera. And here we have a meadow pipit. It's a beautiful meadow pipit and a beautiful linnet. You can see on the linnet here, you can see that this is a male. You can see the pink feathers underneath, because what happens is in the winter, where they molt the feathers, they've got a lot of buff fringes over their pink feathers, and during the course of the winter these wear off, and it leaves them. It's like you know, the coat freshens up, and it becomes a nice pink band, likewise on the head in the summer when they need to display. Then here we have the linnet again. And they can be, you know, you can get lucky sometimes, and they'll sort of not want to fly off straight away, so that's good. Now here we got a couple of yellowhammers. This is a typical adult male. You see how there's not, it's got there's not much, there's no dark markings. This one's got a few black stripes in the centers, so this is more likely to be a younger male, a first year male. And then, oh, this was a special little stone chat on Road Farm that we had. And I've got a couple. Now, you haven't seen a mistnet yet, so I thought, well, I better put this one in there. Now, I'm cheating here because this shows the importance of woodland, because these are firecrests, and I catch these in my garden. Well, I say I catch these, I caught 5 in my garden, and they are spectacular. And I always like to show that one. Right, so that's really what I've got to say on the birds. But what I would also like to say, which echoes what's been said already, is that, you know, I'm a bird ringer. Okay, I've been an ecologist for most of my working life, but the volunteering opportunities from doing the monitoring is great. You can working on as a group. So this year I took part in the reptile and amphibian survey, and it's great to, you know, to see these birds. Somebody puts the mats down and you go and lift them up. Usually, okay, most of the time you might see a mass of ants, or you might see some voles, but you also get some excellent views of slow worms and toads. And then also on the butterfly surveys, you know, I'd never seen a chalk-hill blue until this summer, and now I've got some fantastic views.
You know, we've been talking about the barn owls and how important the voles are, and so we really need to know where we are with voles and field mice. So Kirsten has been doing some monitoring. She's a part of a very new group, and we're really pleased to be engaging with them. It's the first, well, last winter they came around and had a look here, and didn't find much to start with, but I think they've been back again and found quite a few things. So I'll leave her to sort of describe what her work involves, and we'll, well, I hope we haven't cut into your time too much. So take it away.
So hi everyone, my name's Kristen, and I've been part of the Chiltern Small Mammals project. Next slide please, Nick.
Yeah, there you go.
So small mammals are underrecorded, not really sure why, because they're actually quite cool. But I think they're very difficult and time consuming to record, and often we see them as pest species and assume they're pretty abundant. But they do play an important part of our landscape and wildlife, and they're a very important part of the food chain, as we've mentioned, especially with the owls. They also provide food for the larger mammals, and they're predators themselves. So the shrews.
Well, that was bloody dreadful. Just because I went up there and was printing.
Steve, could you mute, please?
Yeah.
All right.
So healthy populations of small mammals reflect healthy populations of other species. So next slide, please, Nick.
Yeah. Thank you.
So there was so although mammals are underrecorded, the data available suggests some worrying declines in our small mammal species, and this comes from a paper that came out recently, which found that occupancy rates in small mammals, there's some serious decreases, and likely causes are things like urbanisation, habitat loss, particularly the decline in hedgerows and grassy margins. So the good news is that farms can play a really important part of providing habitats for small mammals. So next slide. So Bucks Mammal Group is kind of a work in progress. We started in June 2020 during lockdown. A couple of other people as well sort of joined me, and we were looking for mammal monitoring projects locally, but we didn't really have a Bucks Mammal Group, so we've got one in Oxford, but nothing locally. So we set up a Facebook group where we've got 114 members, and we're on Twitter as well, with 139 members who are mammals. But our aim is to bring together people with a shared interest in mammals, to organise surveys and training, and to raise awareness of our local mammals. Next slide, please. So I was a volunteer, or sort of part of the Tracking the Impact project. On the WhatsApp group, there was chat about the vole populations and their impact on owls. So I contacted Nick and said, "Oh, is anyone actually sort of monitoring vole populations locally? And I'd quite like to set up a monitoring project if there's not already one." So Nick found some funding for equipment. So this is a photo here that Nick sent me probably this time last year. We got funding for some Longworth traps, some scales to weigh the mammals, and some plastic bags so we can place the mammals in there, ID them, sex them, and yeah, so that's when we sort of got started. Can I have the next slide? So Nick put us in contact with 3 farms. So we're on Hamden Bottom Farm, Road Farm and Penn Street. And so far we've got 4 volunteers who are in the field, 20 Longworth traps which we place along a 200-metre section of hedgerow. And we've been trapping we started May this year, but we've only actually had 4 trapping sessions so far. So I don't know if you've seen the Longworth traps. These are them here. They've got a small nesting box inside which we place hay and food, and small mammals are quite snug in there until we come and get them in the morning. Have the next slide, please, Nick. So these are the small mammals you'd expect to find in the hedgerows in the Chilterns. So we've got the yellow-necked mouse, which, can you see my cursor there? I'm not sure. Oh no, you won't. Yeah, so they've got a sort of yellow band from, I guess, across their chest in a horizontal way. And then we've got the wood mouse, which looks quite similar, but without that band. But they can have this yellow marking, but in a vertical line. And actually, on Ian's farm, there are wood mice there with white, very yellow markings, which we thought originally were yellow-neck, but they're not. They're wood mice. We haven't found any harvest mice, but they could enter our traps. In the middle there's two vole species. So we've got the field vole, or the short-tail vole, and the bank vole. And then we've got 3 shrew species locally. So there's the common shrew and the pygmy shrew. There's also the water shrew, but we're not really likely to find them on the farms, we don't think. Next slide, please, Nick. So there is a video there, but I don't think it plays on this version. But this is what we found so far. So we've been on Hamden Bottom twice, and we've got wood mice and field voles. We've been to Road Farm, again bank voles and wood mice, and again Penn Street. Obviously we can't draw any conclusions yet because we don't have enough data, but we plan to continue surveying through winter, and hopefully next year we'll have lots more data so we can actually have a look at what's going on there. Next slide, please, Nick.
So, Kristen, I can't find my cursor now.
Oh no.
There you go. Good.
So what's next? We're going to continue to survey. We'd love to have more volunteers. We are happy to receive experienced volunteers, but also anyone new to this kind of thing. We're really happy to help train you up, so you can get started. We really need, as it's quite a labour-intensive work, we'd love to have more volunteers. The Mammal Society are also running a national harvest mouse survey, which we'd love to be part of. So 2 of us, myself and Jamie, in the mammal group, we can train you how to survey for harvest mice, because there's actually limited data on them, so we don't know their status in Buckinghamshire very well. So we'd love, if anyone's got any sites they'd like us to survey on, we'd be very happy to. Next slide, please. So finally, thank you to Jamie, Olwyn and Mike, who have been out surveying. Thank you to the farmers, Ian, Will and David, for allowing us on to the farms. It's a privilege to be there and survey in these kind of places which we don't usually have access to. And thank you so much to Nick, who's helped get the project started and find us funding for equipment. So if you're interested, please get in touch. Maybe via Nick, and we'd love to have more people to help with this. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation on small mammals. I'm really pleased to see that I'm head of the league table of small mammals at the moment. So unfortunately, I know I'm not on reptiles. So Steve, I hope you're ready now, and
yes, I am.
Give us your presentation.
Yeah. So good evening, all. I'm Stephen Jeans, and Nick has asked me to talk about my personal experience with the reptile survey project this year. My background is that I live in Prince's Risborough and volunteer with the Risborough Environmental Group and with Sustrans on the Phoenix Trail doing conservation work and wildlife surveying, including for reptiles. So I first met Nick when he was preparing the Heritage Lottery application for the Ch project. And I joined Tracking the Impact when it was first set up, surveying for butterflies and birds, and of course for the reptile survey this year. So the Farmland Reptile and Amphibian Survey Project began in January 21 in partnership with the Bucks and Milton Keynes Environmental Records Centre. And a great big help came with the donation of refugia needed by Globin Atkins Global, recycling 750 mats and tins from their East-West Rail product. They needed cleaning and marking up, so Steph from Chiltern Rangers and Nick got stuck in. Nick's the one taking the photo, of course. Deploying the refugia and recording the locations on the farms was then done over a period of about 7 days in April and early May by Nick and Claudia from BMERC. That was before the growing season got underway. Oh, okay. Let me just go back to the previous. That was a double click. There we are. It's just a bit slower. So volunteer recruitment followed, and the training session in May at Holly Green Farm in Bledlow. The training included classroom work and an outdoor session that focused on how to find and lift refugia to find nothing at all. This was perhaps a foretaste of some things to come. Then, like everyone else, once I was fully trained, I was anxious to get on with it. And yeah, there we are. So a few days later, at the end of May, I was asked to survey Little Horsenden Farm, which is just north of Prince's Risborough by the Low Ricknield Way and the Phoenix Trail. Here's the information that Nick sent through with the ask, showing 3 loosely defined areas for the refugia locations, with a convenient start point down by the Phoenix Trail. A footpath runs along and made a convenient start for a circuit that I thought would make a good survey route. So I choose to think in those terms for the survey route that I would follow. These are the other details that Nick sent through. A sheet showing details for each of the refugia around the farm. And for each, he gave an ID number, the field name with no real clear identification of the field, a GPS grid reference of 10 digits, and a short description of the location. Well, with all the information that I needed, off I went to look for the tins and mats. If only it was that simple. Here are some of the refugia that Nick and Claudia had placed as they were placed in April. On my first survey on the 3rd of June, I only found 11 of the refugia, and it was a struggle to find even those, the vegetation having grown strongly during the intervening weeks to cover and completely hide many refugia. It was a problem that most, perhaps all, of the farm surveyors had. One solution that was used on many farms was to call in the brush cutting squad. At least I know one farm did. I was out doing some volunteering on the Phoenix Trail when I was disturbed by the howl of brush cutters coming from the nearby Holly Green Farm. When I went to see what should I see hiding behind the face shield, but Nick's let me say, ugly mug, how's that? However, on my farm, I decided to carry on with the searching. So I continued to wade into the vegetation and poke around, having remembered, of course, not to wear my shorts. As well as the vegetation, I had a second problem. I don't use GPS, so I couldn't be sure that I was looking in the right places around my assumed survey route, as the written descriptions were not precise enough in their directions for me to be sure. To address this, I plotted the 10-digit map references on my own little map. And here it is, showing 3 missing refugia in the Millfield area, shown there, well separated along the hedge line, the field edge, whereas the description sheets suggested they were much closer together. And over here in the Barn Owl Box field, they were actually on the other side of a stream that runs along there from where I was actually looking. So no wonder I couldn't find them. A more detailed map from Nick in mid-June confirmed these conclusions. And it was only then that I discovered where the Barn Owl Box was, because the Barn Owl Box was in that tree there. So I was actually looking in the wrong field up to that point. Between the Barn Owl Box field and the field above it, the field to the north of it, there's the 20-metre wide scrub area that actually was identified, as you can see there, with the refugia. So I altered my survey route and off I went again. And as I ventured into this little scrubby patch, I was taken by the variety and the density of the vegetation. It looked to be a real gem of a little natural habitat. But finding the remaining refugia still wasn't easy. They were eventually found by much wading through shoulder-high vegetation, mostly nettles, poking and peering down into the darkness for the objects below. All of these refugia were found in deep, deep shade locations. Obviously much changed since April. So I moved them out from the deep shade to nearby locations with a more open aspect to provide the sun and warmth for any basking creatures. So by the end of June, I knew where all the refugia were and left them for a week until I did my first complete survey. What a reward. On the first proper survey, 3 adult grass snakes, each basking under one of the tins in this area. And that was on the 5th of July. It was a very satisfying thrill, especially after the challenging hours looking for these tins. And perhaps surprisingly, the snakes were under tins that had only been moved about a week before. So it hadn't taken them long to find a nice warm basking place. This is the actual detailed mapping for the refugia that were placed to a farm, map created later in August. Blue are the tins, orange are the mats, different materials for the refugia. And I've marked in the stream that runs down through the 2 streams that run down through the farm. One of the mats, this one here, was favoured, as later surveys showed us a grass snake on 2 occasions. Same mat, different days, maybe it's the same snake. So that was we were lucky to get the photographs there. So overall, the results for 2021 for Little Horsenden Farm, 5 survey visits, and these 5 sightings of grass snake. Many sightings of voles and voles, yeah. And many of their nests as well, because under many of the mats there would be a little nest of grasses and that from the visiting rodents, and of course plenty of ants' nests. So yeah, and disappointingly, the intermittent summer weather meant that the available survey dates didn't fall so kindly. So it was only 5 survey visits I managed to make during the year. So in August or thereabouts, the partnership with the Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Trust came into being, and all the farms were mapped onto their National Reptile Survey database, so that our surveys, once entered, would contribute to the national data sets for reptile distribution in just the same way as was mentioned earlier for the birds, butterflies and plants. So the next slide we're talking, I'll hand back to Nick because to summarise the project results for 2022 as he's presented all these details. So over to you, Nick.
Yeah, thanks very much, Steve. Well, thanks for the 360 feedback all the way through the presentation. That's very much appreciated. So the overall results across all the 18 farms. So if I bear in mind, we started probably a little bit, we're a bit late out the blocks, getting going, and missing the earlier kind of April, May time is probably a little bit of a mistake. So when they're most active. So the results there you can see, and you can actually do, there is a lizard just in here in the photo here. Common lizard, we had 5 records of them, which is brilliant. 3 farms had lizards across them all. Probably most productive was some of the headlands and the margins along from Butler's Hangings, if you notice, getting down towards West Wickham. So brilliant to see. If you said to me a couple of years ago how many common lizards are there in the Chilterns, I probably would have struggled to think there'd be any. So actually by getting out and finding these kind of sites, we're starting to come maybe disprove some of that and put some more pins in maps. So 5 records, 3 farms of common lizard. Grass snake, Steve, the majority of grass snakes have been on your patch, probably unsurprisingly, because you've got a bit of water. A bit lower down in the vale as opposed to up onto the dry tops. But that said, we did have grass snake up on one of the higher farms as well. So great to get grass snakes on the farms, and then probably guess, as you would expect, probably the majority of the records were of slow worm. 4 farms had slow worms. I'm sure with others we'll find more when we address a lot of the issues that you've spoken about, Steve, in terms of practicalities. But 15 records of slow worms, and some of the counts we're getting 7, 8, 9 slow worms on some of the visits as well. So brilliant. They're out there. Lots to learn. Lots to do differently next time around. When we start and the positioning of things to get all those kind of logistical things out of the way. So hopefully we'll find more, but a really, really good start. And thank you, Steve, for your time and effort and patience with your farm and others on your farms as you've gone through the spring. It's been brilliant.
Okay, I'll hand back the screen to you now.
Great, Steve, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much for that, Steve. I'm pleased to see that you had trouble finding your mats, actually, because everybody else had had trouble finding mats that Nick had scattered across the countryside.
It was all fine in April and March. There was nothing growing. It all made sense. And then, funny enough, the grass grew. Yeah,
I will give you the credit of dragging a big bag of mats around, and so with Gay you abandoned them, but you couldn't do both. You needed someone to log them while you were out there dragging the bag, I should think. So, and it looked very hard work because it was quite hot that day you were here anyway.
It was a very hot day, but that's still good fun. Still good fun.
Right. What do you want to do, Nick, now? Do you want to open it up to questions, or?
I'm conscious we have overrun slightly, but if people have got questions, I'm just literally answering one at the moment, and to kick us off maybe for 5 minutes, if that's okay. Mark, you're asking about any records of adders in the Chilterns. We definitely didn't find any on our surveys, which definitely doesn't prove there's not in the Chilterns by any stretch of the imagination. I don't personally know of any. I don't know of any that we've known, or any kind of more valid records. And likewise, Claudia from BMERC didn't know of any current records. There will be going back into history. I guess a lot of surveys never say never.
Yeah, and just to add, we had one informal comment about an adder once from a lady in Bledlow, actually, when we were on the Phoenix Trail. So there was one rumoured sighting, but that was more from a dog bite than anything else.
Yeah, so definitely never say never. I guess if there's others on the call who may know more than I do, but I've not heard anything from BMERC or others to them still being around. But and who knows, around Stoke Common, some of the southern areas, there may still be 1 or 2 hanging around down that way. But not that I know of. And there's another question from Trevor around differences between mats and tins. I haven't done the analysis fully yet on this, but my hunch, I think, from the sites that I've been probably closer to, is that the mats seem to be a bit more productive than the tins. that's completely on a hunch from a few sites when I've been out and had a bit of a look. Whether that's because the mats will hold the temperature for a bit longer and the tins get hotter and colder quicker, I don't know. But it's a good question, and that's the kind of next level of research we need to dig into. So good question. It's not a particularly good answer to your question, but I don't know, Steve, if you sounds like you found yours under tins more than mats.
Yes, that's right. And I think my general comment would be that it's the location that counts more than the material.
Than the material, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there are a couple of questions that have come in the chat, but if anybody has got any other ones, if they want to unmute themselves and say hello and ask any questions of Norman, of Pete, or of Steve or Kristen. Then
Nick, I'll just chip in there while someone's lining themselves up for a question, and just say, from the farmers' side of it, we really appreciate what all you guys are doing out there doing this surveying. I hope you're really enjoying being out on our farms and seeing that we are farming in a reasonably environmentally friendly way. And all this information is, really power to the elbow, but all created by yourselves and through pleasure and enjoyment. We're all benefiting and finding stuff out there that nobody seems to know about. So thank you from all the farmers in the cluster for all the hard work you've been doing.
Brilliant. Well, there's one quick message come up onto the chat. So there's a question there. So before, maybe take this one and then we'll maybe wrap up on your point then. So Collins asked, you came across some lizards and slowworms on a site that's due for development. What effect might that have on the planned development? I'd love to be able to know the answer to that. I guess the broader point is coming back to Andy's presentation right up front. The more data we have, the more intelligence we have, the more evidence we have, whether it's birds, butterflies, plants, reptiles, whatever it is, the more chance we've got of creating a case to either argue against or to, at worst case, I suppose, mitigate against some of the development out there. So I'm not sure a lizard would be a kind of a silver bullet to stop a development, but building a picture of birds, of butterflies, of plants, as I say, we've got that chance. So without the evidence, we've got no chance. With the evidence, we might still not have much of a chance, but without it, we definitely haven't got any chance. So again, it just shows the power of the records that you're gathering, and then the use of them, whether it's, as you say, in helping with habitat projects that you're working across the farms, or helping with development, or making your own enjoyment for records. Without them, we definitely can't fight the case for wildlife. So maybe on that note, it's probably a good chance to maybe wrap the session up. Apologies for overrunning. Apologies for the Zoom gremlins. I don't. Every time we do Zoom, it's something. No matter how many times you rehearse, just changing slides. But anyway, hopefully we're all kind of aware that's worked through and it's not taken away from your enjoyment of the session, really. So Ian, thank you. Will, Wendy, Pete, Norman, Kristen, Steve, and Freddie, and everybody from the whole session. We've crammed a lot into tonight. I hope it's been enjoyable and just showed just how much is going on out there. The time and effort that you all put in is massive, and it's massively appreciated by myself and everyone in the project and everyone on the board. You're making a big difference. Lots of feedback in the evaluation questionnaires, so thank you for filling those in. Lots of things we'll do differently for next year. So come the new year, I'll be back on it and pestering you with other things to get set up, but on it a lot earlier and changing a lot of things to make sure that we improve stuff for you for next year. But thank you for everything. Thank you for your time. Have a great Christmas. Enjoy. And Ian, any final words from you before we close the session?
No, apart from the normal one, everybody stay safe and avoid COVID.
Exactly, that as well. Yes, brilliant. Well, thank you, everyone. Enjoy your breaks, and we'll leave you there.